A starving child whispered 3 words to a stranger in a rain-soaked diner, and by morning, a corrupt deputy sheriff was bleeding on his knees in the parking lot while a wall of outlaw bikers stood between him and the family he'd been destroying for years. This isn't a story about criminals. This is a story about what happens when the law itself becomes the predator, and the only people dangerous enough to stop it are the ones society already threw away. Scarred veterans, broken men, silent protectors riding steel through frozen highways with nothing left to lose except the one thing they refuse to surrender: their souls. If this story hits you, smash that like button, drop your city in the comments, and stay until the very last word. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming. The rain started around 11 and never quit. It came sideways off the mountains, hammering the tin roof of Black Hollow Diner like 1,000 fists trying to punch through. The neon sign outside, half the letters burned dead, flickered pink and blue against wet asphalt, casting ghost light across the empty 2-lane highway that cut through Ridger County like an old scar nobody bothered stitching. The parking lot held 3 vehicles: a rusted Chevy pickup with a cracked taillight, a station wagon so old the paint had given up, and a diner that smelled like burnt coffee, floor wax, and years of conversations nobody wanted to remember. Edenvale moved through the graveyard shift the way she always did: quiet, efficient, invisible. 31 years old with the posture of someone carrying 60. Her apron was stained. Her sneakers squeaked against tile that hadn't been properly mopped since the last waitress quit 2 months ago. She refilled salt shakers with mechanical hands, wiped down tables that didn't need wiping, checked the clock above the kitchen pass-through even though she already knew the answer. 4 more hours. 4 more hours of nothing and fluorescent light and the low electric hum of a building slowly dying around her. The cook, a heavy man named Briggs, who never talked unless food was burning, scraped the grill in the back. The radio on the shelf behind him played something country and sad, half drowned by static. Outside, thunder cracked low and long, rolling across the valley like something enormous turning over in its sleep. Eden stopped at the register and pressed her palms flat against the counter, closed her eyes, breathed. She hadn't slept in 2 days, not really, the kind of sleeplessness that crawls into your bones and sits there, making everything feel slightly unreal, like the world is happening behind glass and you're just watching it from somewhere far away. She had reasons. Everybody in Ridger County had reasons. Hers involved an eviction notice folded inside her jacket pocket, and a phone call from her mother's care facility she'd been avoiding since Tuesday. The diner bell rang. Eden opened her eyes. Cold air hit first. Then the sound. Boots on wood, heavy and deliberate, the kind of footsteps that don't apologize for existing. Leather creaking, the low murmur of voices that carried weight without volume. And beneath everything, the distant growl of motorcycle engines cooling in the rain outside, ticking like metal hearts slowing down after a hard run. 6 men walked in. They filled the doorway the way storms fill a sky, completely, without effort, leaving no room for anything else. Soaked leather cuts dripping rainwater onto the floor. Denim dark with weather. Beards, scars, tattoos crawling up necks and across knuckles. The patches on their backs read Night Reaper's MC in heavy silver thread above a stitched skull wrapped in barbed wire. Bottom rocker, Ridger County. Eden had seen bikers before. Ridger County sat on a corridor between 3 state highways, and clubs rolled through every few months. Loud, temporary, forgettable. But the Night Reapers weren't passing through. They were local. And local meant something different. Local meant the stories were real. She'd heard them at the laundromat, at the gas station, whispered over grocery carts by women who lowered their voices when they said the name. That the Night Reapers ran protection for families the police ignored. That their president had done 2 tours overseas and come back wrong. That they'd once put a man in the hospital for 3 months because he hit his girlfriend in a bar parking lot, and not a single witness came forward because not a single person in Ridger County wanted to stop them. The 6 men moved to the back booth without asking. They always took the back booth. It was understood. Eden grabbed the coffee pot. The man who sat last was the one who mattered. Mercer Kane didn't look like a leader. He looked like something the war had chewed up and spit out and forgotten to kill. massive through the shoulders, thick-necked, with hands that could crush a coffee mug without trying. His leather cut was older than the others, faded, cracked along the seams, patched in places where the original stitching had given out. Silver scars crossed his knuckles in patterns that told stories nobody asked about. His face was angular, hard-boned, weathered by wind and time, and something worse than both. His eyes were the color of winter steel, and they moved constantly, scanning doors, windows, exits, mirrors, the restless surveillance of a man who'd spent too many years in places where relaxation meant death. He sat with his back to the wall. Always. Eden approached the booth the way you approach a fire, respectful of the heat, aware that warmth and destruction lived in the same flame. She set down 6 mugs without being asked, poured coffee black and steady, not spilling a drop despite the tremor in her left hand she'd been hiding for weeks. Nobody at the table spoke. Nobody needed to. The Night Reapers communicated in glances, nods, the slight shift of a jaw or the tap of a finger against scarred wood. "Kitchen closes at 2, Eden said. "Menu's on the table if you want it." Mercer looked at her for exactly 1 second. Not through her, not past her, at her. It was the kind of look that cataloged everything, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she held the coffee pot with both hands to steady it, the faded bruise on her wrist she'd gotten from catching a falling shelf last week, but that could have meant something else entirely. He nodded once. Eden walked away feeling like she'd just been read like a document. The rain intensified. Lightning split the sky somewhere west, illuminating the diner in brief, violent white. In that flash, Eden noticed something she'd missed when she first started her shift. A woman and a child sat in the booth nearest the fogged-up front window. They'd been there for over an hour. Eden was sure of it now. She remembered seating them, remembered the woman's quick, nervous smile, the way she'd pulled her daughter close to the window side of the booth, like she was trying to make them both smaller. The woman wore a heavy turtleneck, despite it being late spring. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her eyes moved the way Mercer's did, constantly scanning, but where his surveillance was predatory, hers was prey. The child was maybe 6, thin-armed, quiet in that unnatural way children get quiet when they've learned that silence is safer than sound. She sat perfectly still, hands in her lap, staring at the laminated menu like it was written in a language she was still learning. Eden had left 2 glasses of water 20 minutes ago. Neither had been touched. The menu lay closed on the table. No order had been placed. Something cold moved through Eden's chest that had nothing to do with the weather. She walked over slowly, coffee pot in hand like a peace offering. She smiled the way waitresses smile at midnight, tired but real, the kind of smile that costs something to maintain. "Hey there," she said softly, crouching slightly to meet the child's eye level. "You two doing okay? Can I get you anything? We got pancakes tonight. Blueberry. Best ones in the county, though I might be biased since I'm the only diner left open past 10. The woman, Lena, though Eden didn't know her name yet, shook her head too fast. "We're fine, just waiting out the rain. We'll be going soon." It was the speed of the refusal that told the truth. Not the words. The words were rehearsed, polished smooth by repetition, the kind of answer you give when you've been practicing it in your head for miles. But the speed, that belonged to fear. Raw, animal fear. The kind that makes you reject kindness, because kindness has conditions. And conditions have consequences. And consequences have hands that find you in the dark. Eden glanced at the child. The girl's eyes were locked on the plate at the next table, a half-eaten stack of pancakes left behind by a trucker who'd paid and gone an hour ago. The child stared at that plate like it contained everything she'd ever wanted. "Sweetheart," Eden said gently, "you sure you don't want—" The girl tugged Eden's sleeve, small fingers, cold, trembling with something beyond weather. She leaned close, her voice barely a breath, and whispered, "We haven't eaten since Monday." The world stopped. Not metaphorically, not dramatically. It simply stopped, the way a heart stops between beats, the way a clock stops when the battery dies, leaving silence where rhythm used to live. Eden felt the floor tilt beneath her sneakers, felt the fluorescent light overhead buzz louder, like even the building had heard, and didn't know what to do with it. Monday. It was Thursday, 3 days. A child hadn't eaten in 3 days. Eden straightened slowly. Her face didn't change, couldn't change, because the woman was watching her with those hunted eyes, and any reaction would be a threat. Any pity would be a weapon, and this woman had clearly had enough weapons pointed at her to last several lifetimes. So Eden simply nodded, the way you nod when someone tells you something enormous, and you need a moment to find ground beneath your feet again. "I'll be right back," she said. She walked to the kitchen, set the coffee pot down on the counter, pressed both hands flat against stainless steel, and breathed through her nose until the burning behind her eyes retreated enough to function. "Briggs," the cook looked up from his grill scraping, "I need a full stack, blueberry, side of bacon, scrambled eggs, orange juice, and whatever soup you got left." Briggs frowned. "They order?" "I'm ordering." "Who's paying?" "I am." Briggs studied her for a moment. He'd worked diners long enough to know what that tone meant. He turned back to the grill without another word and started cracking eggs. Eden carried the food out 7 minutes later, a tray heavy enough to make her wrists ache, loaded with pancakes stacked 4 high, butter melting down the sides, crispy bacon, fluffy eggs, a bowl of chicken soup still steaming, and 2 tall glasses of orange juice. She set it down in front of the child without ceremony, without explanation, without waiting for permission. "On the house," she said quietly. The girl looked at her mother. Lena's face crumbled. Not dramatically, not with sound, but in that slow, devastating way that faces crumble when the person behind them has been holding everything together with nothing but willpower, and the willpower finally runs out. Her eyes filled, her mouth pressed into a hard line. Her chin trembled once. She nodded. The child ate like she was afraid the food would disappear. Small hands grabbing pancakes, stuffing bacon into her mouth, barely chewing. Syrup ran down her chin. Her eyes were wide and bright and desperate. The eyes of a creature who'd been hungry long enough that eating itself had become an act of survival rather than pleasure. Eden stood beside the booth and watched and said nothing, and felt something inside her crack along a fault line she'd been ignoring for years. Across the diner, the back booth had gone silent. Not the comfortable silence of men eating and drinking and existing in each other's company. A different silence. The silence of predators who've caught a scent. Eden felt it before she saw it. That shift in atmospheric pressure. That tightening of the air that happens when dangerous men become alert. She glanced back. Every single night reaper was watching the woman and child. Mercer Kane's coffee sat untouched in front of him, steam curling into nothing. His steel eyes were fixed on Lena Cross with an intensity that could have cut glass. His jaw was set. His scarred hands were flat on the table, not clenched, not relaxed. Ready. The way a soldier's hands get ready before contact. Something in that look terrified Eden more than the storm. Because it wasn't anger, it wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. Mercer Kane recognized something in that woman's fear, something personal. Something old and deep and buried under years of leather and road dust, and the careful construction of a man who'd rebuilt himself from wreckage. He recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting, instantly, involuntarily, with the sick certainty that comes from having written those same words yourself. Boots on wood. Mercer stood. The booth creaked as his weight shifted. Every biker at the table tracked his movement without turning their heads. Peripheral awareness, combat instinct, the wordless coordination of men who'd ridden together long enough to share a nervous system. He crossed the diner floor slowly. Each step deliberate, each footfall heavy enough to feel through the tile. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting his shadow long and dark across the worn linoleum. Rain hammered the windows. The jukebox in the corner, half broken and forgotten, clicked softly between songs like a mechanical throat clearing. Lena saw him coming. Her reaction was immediate and devastating. She pulled her daughter closer, one arm wrapping around the child's thin shoulders, the other hand dropping beneath the table where Eden couldn't see it. Her eyes went wide and hard simultaneously, the look of a woman who'd been cornered before and had learned that the only options were collapse or fight, and she'd chosen fight so many times that it was no longer a choice, but a reflex. "Don't," Lena said. Her voice was low, broken, sharp as a cracked mirror. "Whatever you want, don't." Mercer stopped 2 feet from the table. He didn't sit down, didn't lean forward, didn't do any of the things that large, dangerous men typically do when they want something from someone smaller and more afraid. He simply stood there, hands visible at his sides, and waited. The child looked up from her pancakes, syrup on her chin, eyes enormous. Mercer looked at the girl. Something happened in his face, a microshift, barely visible, like a crack appearing in concrete. The hard lines around his mouth softened a fraction of a degree. The steel in his eyes warmed, not much, not enough for most people to notice, but Eden noticed because she'd spent her entire adult life reading faces across diner tables, and she knew what pain looked like when it surfaced through armor. "What's your name?" he asked the child. His voice was rough. Cigarettes and old war memories and years of not talking unless absolutely necessary. It was the kind of voice that could have been frightening if it tried. But it wasn't trying. It was being careful. The careful voice of a man who understood that he was large and scarred and dangerous looking, and that a child shouldn't have to be afraid of one more thing tonight. The girl looked at her mother. Lena's jaw tightened, but the girl was 6 and hungry and tired, and the big man with the sad eyes had asked a simple question, and she was too exhausted for caution. "Maisie," she said. "Maisie." Mercer nodded like the name meant something. "You like cartoons, Maisie?" The girl nodded slowly. "I like the one with the horse." "The one with the horse?" Mercer almost smiled. Almost. The ghost of it lived in the corner of his mouth for half a second before dying. "That's a good one." He pulled a chair from the nearest table and sat down, not at their booth, not crowding them, but close enough to talk without raising his voice. He sat the way men sit when they're used to being patient, elbows on knees, hands clasped loosely, head slightly bowed. A posture of waiting, a posture of surrender. Lena watched him the way wounded animals watch veterinarians, wanting to trust, unable to afford it. "My name's Mercer," he said, not to the child this time, to the mother, eye to eye. "And I need you to know something before you decide I'm another problem you gotta solve tonight." Lena said nothing. Her hand was still beneath the table. "I don't want anything from you," Mercer said. "I'm not going to touch you. I'm not going to follow you. And whatever you're running from, I've seen it before. Not yours specifically, but the shape of it. The weight." He paused. "I know what that turtleneck's hiding." The words landed like a gunshot in a library, silent and deafening at the same time. Lena's composure cracked. Not completely, she was too well practiced for that. But enough. Her eyes glistened, her breathing changed. The hand beneath the table came up slowly, empty, trembling. "You don't know anything about me," she whispered. "I know you haven't let that little girl eat in 3 days because you're too scared to stop moving long enough to sit in a restaurant," Mercer said. "I know you're watching that door like you expect somebody to walk through it. I know those bruises go further than your neck. And I know that whoever did that to you wears something on his belt that makes people call him Sir." Silence. Rain on glass. The cook's grill hissing in the kitchen. A clock ticking somewhere nobody could see. Lena broke. Not with tears. She was past tears. Had been past tears for months, maybe years. She broke the way old structures break, slowly, with a sound like settling foundations, like something that had been standing through force of habit, finally admitting it couldn't hold anymore. "His name is Cole," she said. "Cole Cross. He's a deputy sheriff. We've been..." She stopped. Swallowed. Started again. 3 years. 3 years of trying to leave and having nowhere to go because everywhere I go, his badge goes further. Shelters call the police when you show up bruised. And when the police are him... She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Mercer's jaw flexed. A single muscle movement visible beneath weathered skin that contained more fury than most men could express with their entire bodies. His eyes didn't change. His hands didn't move. But something behind his face shifted. Something old and dark and deeply personal. Something that had its own scars, its own history, its own unfinished business with men who wore authority like a weapon. "Cross," he said the name like tasting something rotten. "Badge number?" "What?" "His badge number, county jurisdiction, patrol schedule. Does he work alone or with a partner?" Lena stared at him. "Why?" "Because you walked into my diner. Mercer said it simply, without drama, without emphasis, like a fact, like gravity. And nobody walks out of here alone unless they want to. From the back booth, 5 bikers watched in absolute stillness. Not one of them had moved. Not one of them needed to. The message was already written in the air between leather cuts and scarred knuckles and eyes that had seen worse than a dirty cop in a rain-soaked county. One of them, a thick-armed man with a shaved head and a tattoo of a broken compass on his neck, reached into his jacket and pulled out a fold of cash, set it on the table without counting it. Another followed, then another. Wallets opened, bills stacked. A set of truck keys appeared, a folded piece of paper with an address written in pencil. Not a word was spoken. Eden stood behind the counter and watched money pile up on a table where a hungry child sat eating pancakes in a diner at midnight in the rain, and she understood something she'd never been taught, that protection doesn't always wear a uniform, that safety doesn't always come with a badge, and that sometimes the most dangerous men in the room are the only ones willing to stand between a woman and the thing hunting her. Lena looked at the cash, the keys, the address, then at Mercer. Then at her daughter, who had syrup on her fingers and was watching the big man with the sad eyes like he was something she'd seen in a dream. "I can't," Lena whispered. "If he finds out, if he knows I talked to anyone, he won't find out from us. You don't understand. He has people, other deputies, friends on the force. Last time I tried to leave, he tracked my phone and was waiting at the bus station before I even got there. He had his hand around my throat in the parking lot, and nobody, her voice cracked. Nobody did anything." Mercer was quiet for a long moment. The rain filled the silence. "How long ago?" he asked. 6 months. "And you still tried again tonight?" It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. The kind of acknowledgement that doesn't come with pity or admiration, but with something harder, something more permanent. Respect. Mercer recognized courage not as the absence of fear, but as the decision to move despite it. And this woman had been moving for 3 days with a child and no food and no plan and the entire institutional weight of a county sheriff's department hunting her. "I have a daughter too," Mercer said. The words fell like stones into still water. Lena looked at him sharply. "Where?" "I don't know." 2 words. An entire lifetime. "Her mother took her when I got back from my second deployment. I wasn't right. I'm still not right. But I never—" He stopped. The crack in the concrete deepened. "I never touched them. Not once. And I still lost her. Because the system decided a man with nightmares was more dangerous than a man with clean hands. Meanwhile, men like Cole Cross get to keep their families and destroy them from the inside because their paperwork looks right and their uniform pressed clean." The diner felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer, the ceiling lower, like the building itself was leaning in to listen. Maisie reached across the table with sticky fingers and touched Mercer's scarred hand. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just looked down at those tiny fingers resting against his broken knuckles, and breathed, a long, slow breath that carried something heavier than air. "You're sad," Maisie said. Mercer swallowed. "Yeah, kid. Sometimes. It's okay to be sad. My mom's sad too, but she's brave." Something in the room shifted. Eden felt it. The bikers in the back booth felt it. Even Briggs, who never felt anything, paused his grill scraping and stood still in the kitchen doorway. Mercer looked at Lena. "Where were you heading tonight?" "Anywhere. The interstate. North, maybe. I have a cousin in— I don't know if she'd take us. I don't know anything anymore. I just knew if I stayed one more night in that house, Maisie was going to see something a child should never—" She stopped again. The sentence hung in the air, unfinished, its ending written in bruises and silence and the geography of fear. Mercer nodded slowly. He turned his head toward the back booth, made eye contact with the man with the broken compass tattoo, his sergeant-at-arms, a former Marine named Decker who'd lost his left eye in Fallujah and replaced it with a glass one that saw more than most people's real ones. Something passed between them. Silent. Complete. A conversation conducted entirely in the language of men who'd learned to communicate without sound, because sound got people killed. Decker stood, walked to the door, stepped outside into the rain. Through the fogged window, Eden watched him pull a phone from his cut and make a call, rain hammering his shaved head, his silhouette framed by the intermittent flash of distant lightning. He talked for less than a minute, came back inside, water dripping from his jaw. He caught Mercer's eye and nodded once. "There's a place," Mercer told Lena. "Not a shelter, not government, nothing connected to any department or database your husband can access. It's run by people like us, families tied to the road, women who've been where you are, men who've done enough wrong in their lives to understand what right looks like when it matters. It's 4 hours north, across state lines, clean beds, warm food, school for Maisie." Lena's face twisted with something caught between hope and disbelief. The particular agony of a person who's been disappointed so many times that good news itself becomes a source of pain. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you—" "Because I've spent 10 years wishing someone had stood in a diner like this one and offered my daughter the same thing." The clock above the kitchen pass-through ticked past midnight. Thunder rolled low and long outside, shaking the windows in their frames. And then the diner bell rang. Every head turned. The door swung open and cold air flooded in, carrying rain and the sharp chemical smell of aftershave and something else. Something metallic, something institutional, something that smelled like authority wielded without accountability. A man stood in the doorway. Tall, lean, rain dripping from the brim of a county sheriff's department hat. His uniform was pressed beneath a rain jacket, badge catching the neon light in brief, blinding flashes. His face was angular, clean-shaved, handsome in the way that certain predators are handsome. Symmetrical, precise, designed for a purpose that had nothing to do with beauty. His eyes found Lena Cross across the diner the way a rifle scope finds a target. Instantly, efficiently, with the cold mechanical certainty of something that had been calibrated for exactly this moment. Deputy Cole Cross stepped inside and let the door close behind him. The revolver on his hip was unsnapped. Lena made a sound. Not a scream. Not a word. A sound. Low, guttural, involuntary. The sound an animal makes when the trap it thought it had escaped closes again around its leg. She pulled Maisie against her chest so fast the child dropped a forkful of pancakes. Syrup splattered the table. "There you are," Cole said. His voice was calm, controlled. The voice of a man who had never needed to raise it because the consequences of disobedience were understood without volume. He smiled. It was the worst part. The smile was warm and practiced and patient, the smile of a man who wanted the room to see a concerned husband collecting his frightened wife, the smile of a performance so rehearsed it had become indistinguishable from sincerity. "Been looking for you all night, sweetheart. Roads are bad. You shouldn't be out with Maisie in this weather." He took a step forward, and Mercer Kane stood up. The chair scraped backward across tile with a sound like a blade being drawn. 6'3" of scarred, leather-wrapped, war-broken outlaw rose to full height between a deputy sheriff and the woman he'd been destroying for 3 years. The night reapers in the back booth didn't stand, not yet, but their stillness changed. It went from passive to coiled, from resting to ready. The difference between a gun in a holster and a gun in a hand. Cole's smile flickered, 1 microsecond of recalculation behind those predator eyes. "Excuse me," he said to Mercer. "I'm here for my wife." Mercer didn't move, didn't blink. The neon light from outside painted half his face in cold blue, the other half in shadow. His hands hung at his sides, loose, open, deliberately unthreatening in a way that was somehow more threatening than fists. "She doesn't want to go with you," Mercer said. The words were quiet, almost gentle, the kind of quiet that exists inside the eye of a hurricane, surrounded on all sides by destruction waiting to begin. Cole's jaw tightened. The performance cracked, just a sliver, just enough for the real thing underneath to show its teeth. His hand drifted toward his belt, toward the badge, toward everything the badge represented. Paperwork, procedure, institutional backing, the entire weight of a system designed to believe men like him over women like Lena. "I don't know who you are," Cole said slowly, "but you're interfering with a domestic matter. That's obstruction. I'm a sworn officer of Ridger County, and I'm ordering you to step aside." Behind Mercer, Lena was shaking so hard Eden could see it from across the room. Maisie buried her face in her mother's chest. The rain screamed against the windows. And Mercer Kane, president of the Night Reapers MC, combat veteran, scarred outlaw, broken father, and the most dangerous man in a county full of dangerous men, took one step closer to Deputy Cole Cross and said, "She's not leaving with you." Cole's hand closed around the grip of his revolver. In the back booth, 6 bikers rose to their feet simultaneously. A single, unified movement, silent as a wave, heavy as a verdict. Leather creaked, chains clinked softly against denim, boots settled into the floor like roots finding earth. They didn't advance. They didn't need to. Their presence was the message. 6 men who'd survived wars, prisons, and their own demons standing in formation behind a man who'd drawn a line on a diner floor that a deputy sheriff was about to cross. The jukebox clicked between songs. The fluorescent light buzzed. Cole Cross looked at Mercer, looked at the wall of leather behind him, looked at his wife cowering in a booth with their daughter. And something moved behind his eyes, so, not fear, not yet, but the calculation of a man who'd always controlled the equation and was suddenly realizing that tonight the variables had changed. His thumb rested on the hammer of his revolver. Mercer's eyes dropped to the weapon, then rose back to Cole's face. "Go ahead," Mercer said. "Pull it, in front of your daughter, in front of witnesses, in front of 6 men who've already decided how this ends. Pull that trigger, deputy, and find out what happens when the badge stops working." The diner held its breath. Rain hammered the roof. Nobody moved. And then Cole Cross smiled again. Slower this time, sharper, the smile of a man who wasn't retreating but reloading. And he said the thing that changed everything. "You think this is about tonight?" Cole whispered. "You think I came alone?" Outside, through the rain-streaked windows, headlights appeared on the highway. 2 sets, then 3, then 4, approaching fast. The headlights cut through rain like predator eyes opening in the dark. 4 vehicles, moving fast on wet asphalt, tires hissing against the 2-lane highway, high beams turning the diner's fogged windows into blinding white rectangles. Eden stepped back from the counter instinctively, one hand bracing against the register. In the back booth, the Night Reapers didn't flinch, but the air between them thickened into something physical, something you could feel pressing against your chest if you breathed too deep. Mercer didn't turn to look at the approaching lights. His eyes stayed locked on Cole Cross, fixed, unblinking, reading the deputy's face the way a demolitions expert reads a detonator, looking for the mechanism, looking for the timing, looking for the moment between intention and explosion. "You made a call before you walked in," Mercer said. Not a question. Cole's smile widened, the predator smile. The smile of a man who'd spent his entire career building a system of leverage and favors and departmental loyalty that functioned like a private army wearing matching uniforms. "I made a call the second her phone pinged this zip code. You think I've been chasing her in the rain? I've been tracking her since she crossed the county line. I let her run. I always let her run. It's educational." Lena made that sound again, that low, animal sound, and pulled Maisie tighter against her body. The child had stopped eating, syrup cooled on forgotten pancakes. Her small face was pressed into her mother's collarbone, eyes squeezed shut, hands gripping Lena's turtleneck with the desperate strength of a creature that understood the architecture of violence, even if she couldn't name it. Outside, the vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Doors opened, boots on wet gravel. Eden counted shadows through the rain-streaked glass. 6, maybe 7 figures, silhouettes distorted by weather and neon light. Not all in uniform. Some in plain clothes. The kind of men who existed in the space between official and unofficial, who carried badges in their wallets but operated on favors and phone calls, and the mutual understanding that certain things never made it into reports. The diner bell rang again. 3 men entered. 2 in deputy uniforms, rain dripping from their shoulders, hands resting casually on their belts in that trained way law enforcement learns. Close to the weapon, never quite touching it, always suggesting. The third wore civilian clothes, jeans, boots, a hunting jacket, but carried himself with the posture of a man who'd worn a uniform long enough for it to become permanent. His face was weathered, thick-jawed, expressionless. A gold watch glinted on his wrist. Cole glanced at them, nodded once, The nod of a man confirming that the chess pieces were in position. "Sheriff Landry," Cole said, addressing the man in the hunting jacket. "Sorry to drag you out in this weather. My wife's had another episode. Took Maisie and ran. You know how it gets." Sheriff Landry looked at Lena, looked at Maisie, looked at the bikers standing like a leather wall between his deputy and the booth. His face revealed nothing. A bureaucrat's face, a face that had learned long ago to file emotions under categories that wouldn't cause problems. "Ma'am," Landry said to Lena, his voice flat, procedural. "Your husband's concerned about you. Let's get you and your daughter home safe." "She's not going anywhere with him." Mercer's voice hadn't changed, hadn't risen, but something beneath it had shifted. A tectonic movement, deep and slow, the kind that precedes earthquakes. Landry turned his bureaucrat eyes to Mercer. "And you are?" "A citizen with functional eyesight. Take a look at her neck, Sheriff. Go ahead. Pull that turtleneck down an inch and tell me what concerned husband looks like in Ridger County." The room froze. Cole's smile died. Just died. Like a switch had been thrown. What replaced it was worse than anger. It was the flat, calculating absence of expression that men wear when they've been publicly challenged and their internal machinery is deciding between retreat and escalation. "Mercer Kane," Cole said the name slowly, tasting each syllable. "Night Reaper's MC. 2 tours in Korengal. Dishonorable discharge. Assault convictions in 3 states. Lost custody of a daughter. Restraining order filed by his ex-wife." He recited it the way a man reads a menu, casually, with faint boredom. "I know who you are. I've always known who you are. You think I don't keep files on every patch-wearing criminal in my county?" The information landed differently on each person in the room. Eden felt it like a slap. The dishonorable discharge, the restraining order. She looked at Mercer and saw something flicker across his face. Not shame, exactly, but the particular pain of a wound being reopened in public by someone who knew exactly where to press. Decker, the one-eyed sergeant-at-arms, took a half-step forward. Mercer stopped him with a hand, palm flat, fingers spread, without turning around. "Everything he just said is true," Mercer said. He wasn't talking to Cole anymore. He was talking to Lena, looking straight at her with those winter steel eyes. "Every word. I was discharged because I broke a commanding officer's jaw when he ordered an airstrike on a building full of civilians. I've been arrested for assault because I put hands on men who were hurting people smaller than them. And I lost my daughter because I came back from the war with nightmares that made me scream in my sleep loud enough to terrify a 4-year-old. He paused. "Those are my sins. I carry them every day, but I have never raised my hand to a woman or a child. Can your deputy say the same?" Silence. Heavy, suffocating, the kind of silence that fills courtrooms before verdicts. Landry's jaw worked. His eyes moved between Cole and Mercer and Lena, calculating, measuring, running the internal arithmetic of a man whose primary concern was not justice but management. How to manage this? How to contain it? How to make it disappear from paperwork and memory before it became something that threatened the careful architecture of favors and blind eyes he'd spent a career constructing. "This is a domestic matter," Landry said finally. "It's between a husband and wife. I'm ordering everyone who doesn't have a legal stake in this family to clear the premises. Now." "No." The word came from behind the counter. Every head turned. Eden Vale stood with her hands flat on the register, spine straight for the first time all night, her exhausted face hard with something that looked like the moment before a person either collapses or discovers exactly who they've been all along. "She's in my diner," Eden said. "She's a customer. She stays until she decides to leave. And nobody, badge or no badge, drags a woman and child out of my place of business without her consent. That's the law, Sheriff, the actual law. Not the version you run in this county." Cole turned to look at her. Really look at her. His predator eyes recalibrated, adding a new variable to an equation he'd assumed was already solved. "You want to lose your liquor license? What?" he asked quietly. "Your health inspection. This building's one code violation away from condemnation. I can make a phone call. You're already making phone calls in the middle of the night to drag a beaten woman home, Eden said. Make one more. See if I care. Something shifted in Mercer's posture. Barely perceptible. A fractional straightening of his spine, the ghost of recognition. He looked at Eden across the counter and saw what Decker and the other Reapers already saw. A woman who'd been invisible her entire life, choosing this specific moment to become visible, knowing exactly what it would cost. Landry rubbed his jaw. The situation was escalating beyond the parameters he'd prepared for. He'd expected a quick extraction, find the wife, apply the right pressure, drive her home, file nothing. Instead, he was standing in a neon-lit diner at 1 a.m, facing down 6 outlaw bikers and a waitress with a death wish, and the rain outside showed no signs of stopping. "Cole," Landry said carefully, "let's step outside, talk about this. I'm not leaving without my wife. Cole, outside, now." There was something in Landry's voice, not authority exactly, but the firm redirection of a man who understood optics. Too many witnesses. Too many variables. The calculus had shifted. Cole stared at Mercer for a long, terrible moment. Then at Lena. Then at Maisie, who was still pressed against her mother's chest, trembling with the fine, constant vibration of a child whose body had learned to sustain fear the way other children sustain breathing. "Daddy will be right back, sweetheart," Cole said to his daughter. The word, "Daddy," landed like a grenade in the room. Because it was true. He was her father. Whatever else he was, whatever he'd done, that biological fact remained, and it carried legal weight and institutional power and the particular cruelty of a system that often confused possession with parenthood. Maisie didn't look up. Cole turned and walked toward the door. Landry and the 2 deputies followed. The diner bell rang as they stepped into the rain. Through the fogged window, Eden watched them cluster near a patrol car, shadows gesturing in the downpour, words lost beneath the sound of weather. The door closed. The diner exhaled. Mercer didn't move for a full 10 seconds. He stood where he'd stood, facing the door, watching the shadows outside with the patient intensity of a man counting ammunition. Then he turned and looked at Decker. "How long do we have? Before they come back in? 5 minutes? Maybe 10. Landry's a politician. He'll try talking first." "And when talking doesn't work?" Decker's glass eye caught the neon light. "Then they come back in with legal authority and enough backup to arrest every one of us. Obstruction, interference, resisting. Cole writes the report, Landry signs it, and the woman goes home with the man who put those bruises on her throat." The words hung in the air like smoke. Mercer turned to Lena. "How fast can you move?" She blinked. "What?" "If I get you out the back, through the kitchen, into a vehicle, how fast can you and Maisie move?" There's a back door?" "Every diner in America has a back door. Briggs?" Mercer raised his voice toward the kitchen. "Your loading dock. Does it open onto the alley?" The cook appeared in the kitchen doorway, grease-stained apron, heavy arms folded. He looked at Mercer, looked at Lena, looked at the child. "Yeah," Briggs said. "Opens onto the back. Alley runs to Pine Street. Pine Street hits the highway at the old feed mill turnoff. Can you get a car back there?" "Truck. My truck. It's parked on the side lot." "Keys?" Briggs reached into his apron pocket and tossed them across the diner. Mercer caught them one-handed without looking. "Hold on." The voice came from the back booth. A man named Preacher, no church affiliation. The name came from his habit of delivering long, quiet lectures to men he was about to hurt, stepped forward from the Reaper formation. He was older than the others, gray threading through his beard, deep lines carved into a face that had seen more years of bad road than most men survived. His eyes were troubled. "Mercer, a word." Mercer looked at him. Something passed between them. Not disagreement, not yet, but the preliminary friction that comes before disagreement, the static charge that builds in the air before lightning finds its path. Preacher walked close enough that his voice wouldn't carry, but in the dead quiet diner, with the rain temporarily softening outside, Eden heard every word from behind the counter. "We can't do this," Preacher said. Mercer's face didn't change. We're already doing it. We're sheltering a missing person from law enforcement, a woman whose husband has legal custody, in front of a sheriff, 2 deputies, and half a dozen more outside. You know what this becomes? I know what she becomes if we hand her back. I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about the club. Preacher's voice was low, strained, the voice of a man forcing himself to say something he didn't want to say. We have 23 families dependent on Reapers staying operational, 11 kids, 3 members on parole who can't afford a jaywalking ticket, let alone federal obstruction charges. You want to burn the whole thing down for one woman we met 30 minutes ago? The question wasn't cruel, it was tactical, and the fact that it was legitimate made it worse. Mercer stared at Preacher for a long time. Rain tapped the windows in the silence between them. You remember Haskell? Mercer asked. Preacher's face tightened. Don't. You remember what Haskell's wife looked like when they found her? After 3 years of everyone knowing and nobody doing anything because Haskell's brother was a state trooper. That's not the same. It's exactly the same. Different badge, same body in the ground. Mercer's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. I'm not asking you to agree with me, Preach. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. And I'm telling you that any man at this table who wants to walk, walks. No patches pulled, no consequences. But I'm not handing that woman to a man who'll put her in the ground before summer. Preacher looked at Lena, at Maisie, at the stack of cash and keys still sitting on the booth table. His jaw worked. His fingers opened and closed at his sides. The involuntary gesture of a man wrestling with something that had no clean solution. The club votes, Preacher said. That's how it works. That's always how it works. Then call a vote. Right now? Here? Right now. Here. Before those men outside finish their conversation and walk back through that door. Preacher turned to the booth. 4 bikers stood in a loose line. Decker with his glass eye, a young rider named Cortez who'd done 3 years at Leavenworth for a crime his commanding officer committed, a quiet giant named Dutch, who never spoke above a murmur, and a thin, wiry man called Needle, whose hands were never still because stillness reminded him of the VA hospital, where he'd spent 14 months learning how to sleep without screaming. You heard him, Preacher said. The question's on the table. We shelter the woman and the child. We're at war with Ridger County law enforcement. We don't shelter them. She goes home with the man who's been using her as a punching bag for 3 years. Club vote, aye or nay? Decker didn't hesitate. Aye. Cortez. Aye. Dutch nodded once, which was his version of a speech. Aye. Needle's hand stopped moving for the first time all night. He looked at Mercer, looked at the child. His eyes, bright, restless, damaged, softened into something that resembled the person he'd been before the war took everything except his hands and his nightmares. Aye, Needle said. 4 ayes. Preacher stood last. The old biker rubbed his face with both hands, dragged his palms down weathered cheeks, breathed out through his nose, a long, slow exhale that carried the weight of 20 years riding under the reaper patch. 20 years of knowing that loyalty to the club and loyalty to conscience didn't always ride the same road. Aye, Preacher said quietly, but when this goes sideways, and it will go sideways, I want it on record that I said so. Noted, Mercer said. Now move. The diner transformed in 60 seconds. Mercer sent Cortez and Needle out the front door. A visible distraction, 2 bikers stepping onto the porch in the rain, lighting cigarettes with cupped hands, their leather cuts catching neon light, drawing the attention of the deputies clustered around patrol cars in the parking lot. Meanwhile, Decker moved to the kitchen with Lena and Maisie. The child was half asleep now, exhaustion finally winning over fear, her small body limp against her mother's chest as Lena carried her through the kitchen's swinging doors. Eden followed without being asked. She didn't know why. She couldn't have explained it if someone demanded an answer. She just followed, past the grills and the fryers and the walk-in cooler humming its cold mechanical song, through the storage room stacked with boxes of napkins and industrial-sized cans of tomato sauce, to the loading dock at the back of the building where Briggs's truck, an old Ford F-150 with mud on the fenders and a cracked windshield, sat in the narrow alley beneath a single yellow security light buzzing with insects despite the rain. Decker opened the truck's passenger door. Lena climbed in, Maisie in her arms. Eden watched the woman's hands shake as she buckled her daughter into the center seat, fumbling with the belt, dropping it twice, finally clicking it home with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. "Where am I going?" Lena asked. Her voice was hollow now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the raw, scraped-out emptiness that follows sustained terror. Decker handed her a folded piece of paper. The same paper from the booth, the address in pencil. Highway 9 north to the state line, cross into Merritt County, take exit 47 to Bramble Creek Road. Follow it 6 miles to a farmhouse with a blue mailbox. Woman named Greta Voss will be expecting you. She doesn't ask questions, she doesn't answer phones she doesn't recognize. And she's got 2 Rottweilers and a shotgun for anyone who shows up uninvited. Lena took the paper with trembling fingers, looked at it like a life raft, looked at Decker like a ghost. "What about you? All of you? He'll come after you. Let us worry about that. You don't understand. Cole doesn't forget. He doesn't let go. He collects debts. He's been collecting debts his entire career, and nobody's ever stood up long enough to—" "Ma'am." Decker's voice was quiet, steady, the voice of a man who'd defused roadside bombs under fire and found the experience less stressful than most job interviews. "We're the Night Reapers. We've been collecting debts longer than your husband's been wearing a badge. Drive north. Don't stop for gas until you cross the state line. And don't call anyone, not your cousin, not your mother, not anyone, until Greta tells you it's safe." Lena looked past Decker to Eden, who stood in the loading dock doorway with her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "Thank you," Lena whispered, "for the pancakes." Eden nodded. Her throat was too tight for words. Briggs's truck started with a diesel cough. Headlights split the alley into hard light and deep shadow. Lena pulled out slowly, tires crunching wet gravel, and turned north onto Pine Street. The red taillights shrank through the rain until they were just 2 small points of warmth in a cold, dark world. And then they were gone. Eden stood in the alley and watched the emptiness where the truck had been. Behind her, Decker was already moving back through the kitchen, back through the diner, back to formation. He walked past Eden without a word, but as he did, his hand briefly touched her shoulder. Just a touch. Barely there. The contact of a man who understood that certain things couldn't be said and shouldn't be tried, and the only honest response to witness courage was the momentary acknowledgement that you'd seen it. Then he was gone, and Eden was alone in the alley with the rain and the yellow light and the enormous, terrifying understanding that she had just helped smuggle a woman and child away from a deputy sheriff who would eventually discover what happened and eventually come looking for everyone who made it possible. She went back inside. The diner looked different now. The same fluorescent lights, the same cracked tile, the same jukebox and counter and row of red vinyl stools. But something had shifted. The way a house shifts after an earthquake, still standing but no longer quite settled on its foundation. Mercer stood near the front window watching the parking lot through a gap in the fog. Outside, Cortez and Needles still smoked on the porch, casual and unhurried, 2 bikers killing time in the rain. The deputies were still clustered near patrol cars. Landry was on his phone. Cole paced between vehicles, rain soaking through his uniform, his movements sharp and agitated. A man whose control was slipping and who could feel it slipping and who was becoming more dangerous with every inch it moved. "He's going to check the booth," Mercer said without turning. Eden looked at the front booth where Lena and Maisie had been sitting. The remnants of breakfast, half-eaten pancakes, cold bacon, orange juice glasses, syrup fingerprints, still covered the table. Evidence of presence. Evidence of departure. "How long before he comes back inside?" Eden asked. "Depends on Landry. Landry's careful. Cole's not. The careful ones always lose to the reckless ones because careful takes time and reckless doesn't." As if on cue, the parking lot erupted. Cole broke from the group and strode toward the diner. Landry grabbed his arm. Cole shrugged him off, sussed him. Violently, the movement of a man whose domestic mechanics were so deeply embedded that even his interactions with other men carried the muscle memory of force. He crossed the parking lot in long, angry strides, rainwater spraying from his boots, and hit the diner door hard enough to crack the frame. The bell screamed. Cole stormed inside. His eyes went straight to the front booth, the empty front booth, the abandoned food, the missing woman, the missing child. His face underwent a transformation that Eden would remember for the rest of her life. The careful mask, the concerned husband, the patient officer, the reasonable man, didn't just crack. It collapsed. What emerged from underneath was raw and ugly and real. The face of a man who owned things, who controlled things, who cataloged the world into categories of mine and not mine, and who experienced the loss of possessions as a personal assault on the fundamental order of the universe. Where is she? The question was directed at the room. At everyone and no one. His voice had changed, stripped of performance, stripped of charm, compressed into something cold and dense and dangerous. Nobody answered. Cole moved through the diner like a man searching a crime scene, checked the bathroom, kicked open the men's room door hard enough to dent the wall, checked the kitchen. Briggs stood at his grill, arms folded, impassive as concrete, and found nothing but grease and empty floor. Checked the loading dock and found the back door ajar, rain blowing in through the gap, the alley empty. He came back into the dining room breathing hard. Rain dripped from his hair, his uniform, his clenched fists. The revolver was still holstered, but his hand kept drifting toward it, a habit, a comfort object, the physical manifestation of the only kind of authority he truly understood. "You," he said to Eden, "where did they go?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "The woman and child who were sitting in that booth 30 minutes ago, my wife and my daughter. Where did they go?" "People come and go, Deputy. It's a diner, not a prison." Cole stepped closer. Close enough that Eden could smell the aftershave, sharp, chemical, aggressive. Close enough that she could see the vein pulsing in his temple and the particular darkness in his eyes that told her everything she needed to know about what Lena Cross had been living with for 3 years. "You're going to tell me," Cole said quietly, "or I'm going to make your life very difficult." "She already told you she doesn't know." Mercer's voice came from behind Cole, calm, level, positioned between the deputy and the door, with the quiet deliberation of a man who'd spent a career learning where to stand in a room to control it. Cole spun. His hand finally found the revolver grip, drew it halfway before stopping, not because of Mercer, but because Landry appeared in the doorway behind him, 2 deputies flanking, their faces tight with the particular anxiety of men caught between a superior's orders and a situation spiraling past the edge of their training. "Cole." Landry's voice was steel-wrapped in patience. "Holster the weapon." "She took them. These people took my family, Ray." "Holster the weapon. Now." A terrible moment stretched between them. 3 seconds that lasted a century. Cole's hand on the revolver, Mercer 3 feet away with empty hands and eyes that said, "Go ahead." Landry in the doorway calculating institutional damage with the speed of a man whose career depended on knowing which fires to fight and which to let burn. Cole holstered the weapon. But the look he gave Mercer, the look he gave Eden, the look he gave every Reaper standing in that diner, was the look of a man filing names, memorizing faces, building a list that would be referenced at a later date, in a darker hour, when there were no witnesses and no politics and no sheriff managing optics. "This isn't over," Cole said. To Mercer specifically, eye to eye, close enough to smell the coffee on the biker's breath. "I know where your clubhouse is. I know your members' names. I know who's on parole and who's got warrants and who's 1 traffic stop away from going back inside. You think you saved somebody tonight? You just painted targets on every man wearing that patch." He turned and walked out of the diner. Didn't slam the door this time. Closed it softly. The soft close was worse. Landry lingered for a moment. His bureaucrat eyes swept the room one final time, cataloging, filing, organizing this incident into whatever mental framework would allow him to sleep tonight and function tomorrow. "Mr. Kane," Landry said, "a word of advice, professional to professional. We're not the same profession. No, we're not, which is why I'm suggesting, strongly, that you and your men take a long ride out of this county and stay gone until the weather changes. That's not a threat. That's a forecast." He left. The diner bell rang one last time, then silence. The night reapers stood in the empty diner and listened to patrol cars pulling out of the parking lot, gravel crunching, engines revving, headlights sweeping across the front windows and then disappearing north up the highway. One by one, the sounds faded until there was nothing left but rain and the hum of fluorescent lights and the drip of water from leather cuts onto tile. Preacher was the first to speak. We've got maybe 12 hours before he runs plates on every bike outside and pulls every record he can find. Cortez, you're on parole. If he connects you to this, you're doing 18 months minimum. Cortez shrugged. It was not a shrug of indifference. It was the shrug of a man who'd already done time for someone else's crime and found the prospect of doing it for his own decision, for his own conscience, somehow more bearable. Dutch, Preacher continued, your custody hearing is in 3 weeks. A single arrest, any arrest, and you lose visitation permanently. Dutch's massive body absorbed the information without visible reaction. But his hands, enormous, calloused, gentle hands that had once held his infant son in a VA hospital while machines beeped and nurses whispered, those hands closed slowly into fists at his sides. And Needle. Preacher turned to the thin, wiry biker whose fingers had resumed their restless movement. Your VA benefits, your medication, one federal charge, and they cut everything. Needle's hand stopped again. Something moved behind his eyes. Something fragile, something that lived in the space between medication and relapse, between managed symptoms and the screaming darkness that waited like patient water behind a cracking dam. I know the cost, Mercer said. He stood in the center of the diner, surrounded by his brothers, carrying the weight of every consequence Preacher had just outlined. I know it for every man here, and I know that if we walk away tonight, a woman dies. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but eventually, in that house, with that man, while their daughter listens through a wall. The diner clock ticked. Rain fell. So what's the play? Decker asked. His glass eye caught the light. His real eye was steady, focused, already operational. Mercer looked at Eden. How well do you know Cole Cross? Eden hesitated. The question was a door, and walking through it meant walking into something she could never walk back from. She looked at the counter where she'd spent 3 years pouring coffee and counting tips and trying to save enough to keep her mother in a care facility that was slowly bleeding her dry. She looked at the eviction notice folded in her jacket pocket. She looked at the empty booth where a child had eaten pancakes with desperate hands while a man with a badge waited outside in the rain. Better than I want to, Eden said. He comes in here every Thursday night, after shift, sits at the counter, orders steak and eggs. Tips exactly 15%. Makes conversation that's not conversation. Asks questions, remembers answers. The kind of man who builds a file on everyone he meets. What kind of questions? Who comes in? Who goes out? What cars are in the lot? Whether any bikes have been through lately. Eden paused. He asked about you once, about the Night Reapers 6 months ago. Asked like it was casual, but nothing Cole Cross does is casual. Mercer's jaw tightened. What did you tell him? That I pour coffee, not intelligence briefings. The ghost of something, not quite a smile, not quite respect, something in between, crossed Mercer's face. He's been building a case, Mercer said. Not to Eden, to the room. Not on us specifically. On leverage, control points. He knows who's on parole, who's got warrants, who's vulnerable. He's been mapping this county's pressure points for years, and he just told us he's willing to use every single one. Then we need pressure points of our own, Decker said. We have one. Mercer's eyes hardened. Something dark entered them. Something that had been waiting. Something that had lived behind those winter steel irises since long before tonight. 3 years ago, before I became president, the old charter kept records. Every complaint filed against Ridger County law enforcement, every domestic call that got buried, every incident report that disappeared from the system. Harlan kept it all. The name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Harlan. Eden saw the bikers' faces change, all of them simultaneously. Preacher's jaw locked. Decker's hand went to the back of his neck. Cortez looked at the floor. Even Dutch, impassive Dutch, shifted his weight like a man absorbing a blow. Harlan's dead, Mercer, Preacher said. His voice was different now, harder. The voice of a man standing in front of a door he didn't want opened. The records aren't. You don't know that. I know he kept them somewhere. Physical copies, hard evidence, photographs. Medical records from women who went to the ER and got turned away. Complaints that were filed and vanished from the system within 24 hours. Mercer paused. Harlan told me about them 2 weeks before he died. Silence. The kind of silence that has teeth. Harlan died in a single-vehicle accident on Route 11, Preacher said carefully. Wet road, lost control, hit a tree. On a road he'd ridden 1,000 times, in weather he'd ridden through his whole life. 2 weeks after telling me he had evidence that could bring down half the county sheriff's department. The implication hung in the air like gun smoke. Are you saying? Preacher started. I'm saying what I've been saying for 3 years and what nobody in this room wanted to hear. Harlan didn't lose control. Harlan was removed because he knew what Cole Cross was, and he had the paper trail to prove it. And if we can find those records, wherever Harlan hid them, we don't just protect Lena Cross. We dismantle the machine that's been protecting men like Cole since before any of us patched in. The clock read 1:47 a.m. The rain had slowed to a steady, rhythmic drumming. The storm's second act, patient and relentless. Eden stood behind the counter with her hands gripping the edge hard enough to whiten her knuckles, watching 6 scarred men in leather cuts process the possibility that their former president, their brother, their leader, the man who'd built the Night Reapers into what they were, had been murdered by the same system they'd just declared war against. Decker broke the silence first. Where do we start looking? Harlan's wife, Mercer said. Claire. She's still in the county. Stopped returning calls after the funeral. Stopped coming to events. Stopped talking to anyone connected to the club. I've given her space for 3 years. Tonight, space runs out. And if she doesn't have them, Preacher asked, then we find whoever does. And if Cole finds Lena first? Mercer looked at Preacher. The diner light caught the silver scars on his knuckles. Outside, the Harley engines sat cooling in the rain, metal ticking like countdown timers. Then we weren't fast enough, Mercer said, and another woman dies because men who knew better decided it was somebody else's problem. Preacher held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Slowly, reluctantly, the nod of a man stepping off a cliff because the alternative was standing still while the ground beneath him crumbled. One more thing, Mercer said. He turned to Eden. You just put yourself in Cole's crosshairs. He'll come back for you, not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. He'll find a reason, like health code, liquor license, overdue permit, something quiet, something institutional, the kind of violence that doesn't leave bruises but destroys lives just the same. Eden felt her stomach drop. She'd known it, had known it the moment she opened her mouth and told a deputy sheriff that her diner wasn't a prison. But hearing it stated plainly, without decoration, without comfort, made it real in a way that knowledge alone hadn't. What do I do? She asked. Mercer reached into his cut and pulled out a card. Not a business card, not printed, just a scrap of heavy paper with a phone number written in black ink. He set it on the counter. You call that number, day or night. Anything happens, anything at all. You call. Eden picked up the card. The paper was warm from his body heat. The number was written in a hand that was careful despite its size. The penmanship of a man who'd learned precision in places where imprecision killed people. I'm not part of your club, Eden said. No, Mercer agreed. You're not. But tonight you stood between a woman and the man hunting her, and that makes you part of something whether you wanted it or not. He turned and walked toward the door. The Night Reapers followed, one by one, leather cuts swaying, boots heavy on old wood. Decker last, pausing at the door to look back at Eden with his one good eye. Lock up tonight, he said. Both doors, and move your car around back where it can't be seen from the road. Then they were gone. Eden stood alone in the empty diner. The clock ticked, the rain fell, coffee cooled in mugs that would never be finished, pancake syrup dried on a table where a hungry child had sat eating like the food might disappear. She locked both doors, moved her car around back, stood in the kitchen with her hands shaking and the fluorescent light buzzing, and the eviction notice in her pocket and the phone number on the counter, and the absolute bone-deep certainty that the life she'd been living, the invisible, exhausting, barely surviving life of a graveyard shift waitress in a dying county, had ended tonight. What replaced it was something she didn't have a name for yet, something that tasted like cold rain and engine exhaust, and the particular dangerous freedom that comes from having nothing left to lose. Outside, Harley engines fired. One by one, the night reapers pulled out of the Black Hollow parking lot and disappeared into the wet dark, heading north, heading toward a dead man's secrets and a living woman's survival and a war that had been building in Ridger County for 3 years, beneath the surface of routine traffic stops and Thursday night steak dinners and the quiet, systematic destruction of every woman who'd ever had the misfortune of loving Cole Cross. 40 miles south, in a house with clean floors and locked windows, and a kitchen where the knife drawer had been bolted shut since Maisie learned to walk, Cole Cross sat at his desk in full uniform, rain still drying on his shoulders, and opened a laptop. He typed a name into the department database, Mercer Kane, then another, Eden Vale. Then he opened a new file, labeled it with a date, today's date, and began to write, methodical, precise, patient, the first lines of a report that would, over the coming weeks, become the instrument of destruction he'd been perfecting his entire career, because Cole Cross didn't rage. He documented. And documentation, in the hands of a man with a badge and no conscience, was the most dangerous weapon in America. Claire Harlan lived at the end of a dirt road that didn't appear on any county map. The house sat behind a wall of dead oak trees, set back 200 yards from the nearest paved surface, wrapped in the kind of rural isolation that could mean either peace or hiding, depending on who was doing the living. The mailbox at the turnoff had no name on it, just a number, 1140, painted in faded white on rusted metal. The driveway was gravel and mud. The porch light was off. Mercer killed his engine at the tree line and sat in the dark. Rain had stopped an hour ago, but the air was still heavy with it. Wet earth, cold pine, the mineral smell of standing water in ditches alongside the road. His leather cut was damp against his shoulders. His hands ached on the handlebars, knuckles stiff from cold, and the particular tension of a man who'd been gripping too hard for too long. Behind him, 5 Harleys idled in a loose formation, their headlights cutting pale tunnels through the pre-dawn fog. It was 4:17 a.m., 3 hours since the diner. 3 hours since Cole Cross sat in his kitchen building a digital weapon, and every minute that passed was a minute closer to the moment that weapon found its targets. Decker pulled alongside, engine rumbling low. His glass eye caught the fog-filtered light from a distant farmhouse across the valley. "She won't want to see us," Decker said. "No. Harlan's been dead 3 years. She buried him, buried the patch, buried everything connected to this club. We show up at 4 in the morning asking about hidden files. She's going to think we've lost our minds." "Maybe we have." Decker studied Mercer's profile. The hard jaw, the deep-set eyes, the way his shoulders carried weight that had nothing to do with muscle or bone. "You really believe Harlan was murdered?" Mercer didn't answer immediately. He stared at the dark house at the end of the dirt road and let the silence sit. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of everything except the raw fact of what he carried. "November 16th, 3 years ago. Harlan calls me at 11 at night, tells me he's been collecting evidence for 2 years. Domestic abuse complaints buried by dispatch, medical records from the ER that were flagged and deleted. Photographs? Witness statements from women too scared to go on record, but willing to write things down if someone promised the paper would never touch a government desk." Mercer paused. He said he had enough to bring down Cole Cross and 4 other officers in the department. Said he was going to hand it to a federal contact he'd been talking to, someone outside the county system. And 2 weeks later, he's dead on Route 11. Single vehicle accident, wet road, lost control, case closed in 48 hours. No investigation, no toxicology beyond standard, no examination of the bike. Decker's jaw tightened. Who signed off on the report? Mercer looked at him. Just looked, and the answer was there in his eyes before he said it. Landry. The name landed like a hammer on glass. Decker's real eye widened. A fraction, barely perceptible, but enough to tell Mercer that the implication had connected. Sheriff Raymond Wandry. The same man who'd stood in the diner doorway 3 hours ago, managing optics, controlling the situation, steering Cole Cross away from a confrontation that threatened institutional stability. The same man who'd told Mercer to take a long ride and stay gone. The same man who'd closed the investigation into Harlan's death in 48 hours, with a report that read like something written before the accident happened. "How long have you known?" Decker asked. "I've suspected since the funeral. I've known since tonight." "What changed tonight?" Landry's face. When Cole called him, when the sheriff of Ridger County showed up personally at a diner at 1 in the morning to help a deputy retrieve his wife. That wasn't protocol. That was partnership. That was two men who share something they can't afford to let anyone see. Preacher's bike growled up from behind. The old biker pulled between them, engine dropping to idle, his face gaunt in the gray light. "We doing this or decorating the tree line?" Mercer dismounted. His boots hit wet gravel with a sound like bones settling. He walked toward the house alone, leaving the others at the road. A deliberate choice, because 6 bikers on a widow's porch at 4 in the morning would look like an invasion, and what he needed was a conversation. The porch steps groaned under his weight. The screen door was locked. A motion light above the door stayed dark, either disabled or burned out, another detail that spoke to a woman who'd decided visibility was a liability. He knocked. 3 times. Patient. Waited. Nothing. Knocked again. Harder. The kind of knock that doesn't announce a visitor so much as insist upon one. A curtain moved in the window to the left. A shadow behind it, brief, careful, the movement of someone who'd learned to check before opening. Then stillness. "Claire," Mercer spoke at the door, not through it. Pitched his voice low enough to reach the window without carrying to the road. "It's Mercer Kane. I know what time it is. I know you don't want to see me, but I need 5 minutes, and it's not about what you think." Silence. The fog pressed in. A dog barked somewhere far away, muffled by distance and damp air. Then the deadbolt turned. The door opened 4 inches. A chain held it. Behind the chain, a face. Claire Harlan, 46 years old, once the heartbeat of every Reaper gathering, the woman who'd organized barbecues and funerals with equal grace, who'd held babies and whiskey bottles and sobbing wives with the same steady hands. That woman was gone. What remained was thinner, sharper, carved down to essential structure by 3 years of grief and isolation. Her hair was gray where it hadn't been. Her eyes were dark and flat and hostile. "No," she said. "Claire, I said no. Whatever you need, whatever the club needs, whatever Harlan left behind, no, I'm done. I was done the day I buried my husband. A woman almost died tonight." Claire's mouth tightened. A muscle in her jaw flexed, the same reflex Mercer had seen in Lena Cross, in Eden Vale, in every woman who'd been forced to build armor from refusal because nothing else was strong enough. "Women almost die every night in this county," Claire said. "I know. I was married to the man who tried to stop it, and it killed him. That's why I'm here." "You're here because you need something. You people always need something." Harlan needed something. Needed to be the hero. Needed to fix the system. Needed to prove that one man with enough evidence could take down a machine that's been running since before any of us were born. And you know where that need got him? Route 11. A tree. A closed casket because they couldn't reconstruct enough of his face for an open one. Her voice cracked on the last sentence. Just a hairline fracture. Enough to let the rage through, not enough to let the grief follow. She'd built the wall too well for that. Mercer stood on the porch and took it. All of it. Didn't defend. Didn't redirect. Didn't do anything except stand there and absorb a widow's fury the way he absorbed everything, silently, completely, adding it to the tonnage he already carried. "You're right," he said, "about all of it. Harlan tried to be a hero and it killed him, and I let it happen because I wasn't paying attention, because I was too busy running the club and managing the road and pretending that the dead man stare I saw in his eyes the last time we talked was just stress. I missed it. I failed him. And I've been carrying that for 3 years." Claire's eyes glistened. The chain on the door caught a reflection of distant fog light. "So what do you want, Mercer? Absolution?" "I want the files." Silence. Long, heavy, the kind of silence that lives between people who share a dead man and nothing else. What files? Claire said. But her voice changed, shifted downward, tightened, the voice of a person who knows exactly what's being asked and is deciding whether the question itself is dangerous enough to refuse. The evidence Harlan collected: domestic abuse complaints, medical records, photographs. He told me he had physical copies, paper, not digital, hidden somewhere that couldn't be accessed through any system. I'm asking where. Claire stared at him through the 4-inch gap. Her dark eyes searched his face. For what? Mercer couldn't tell. Sincerity? Desperation? The particular kind of madness that made men like Harlan risk everything for strangers? And if I tell you, she said slowly, what happens to you? I don't know. Yes, you do. The same thing that happened to him. You know exactly where this road goes. And you're standing on my porch at 4 a.m. asking me to hand you the same map that got my husband killed. She wasn't wrong. Mercer felt the truth of it in his chest. Cold, metallic, settled like shrapnel that couldn't be extracted without killing the patient. There's a 6-year-old girl tonight who ate her first meal in 3 days at a diner counter, Mercer said. Her mother's been beaten for 3 years by a man with a badge. I got them out. But getting them out isn't enough. He'll find them. Men like Cole Cross always find them, unless somebody pulls the foundation out from under the system that protects him. Harlan said the same thing, almost those exact words, 3 weeks before he died. I know. And you're standing here anyway. I'm standing here anyway. Claire closed her eyes. Her hand on the door frame whitened at the knuckles. Somewhere behind her in the dark house, a clock ticked, steady, mechanical, indifferent to the weight of what was happening on the porch. She unchained the door. It swung open. Claire stood in a faded bathrobe, barefoot on cold wood, smaller than Mercer remembered, diminished by the kind of loss that doesn't shrink the body but compresses the spirit until the person inside occupies less space than they used to. Come in, she said. Just you. Mercer stepped inside. The house smelled like old wood and cold coffee and the particular stillness of a space where one person lives alone and has stopped pretending otherwise. Photographs lined the hallway. Harlan in his cut, Harlan on his bike, Harlan and Claire at some roadside barbecue with smoke rising behind them and smiles that belonged to people who didn't know what was coming. Claire led him through the kitchen, dishes in the sink, a single coffee cup on the counter, a calendar on the wall with nothing written on any date, and stopped at a door that led to the basement. He built it 3 months before he died, Claire said. Came home one night with plywood and a padlock and spent a weekend in the basement with a drill and a bottle of bourbon. Wouldn't tell me what he was doing, wouldn't let me come down. She paused. After the funeral, I came down, looked at it, closed it up. Haven't opened it since. What's in it? See for yourself. She opened the basement door. Wooden stairs descended into cold dark. A pull chain light clicked on. A single bare bulb that cast everything in harsh, surgical yellow. Mercer went down. The steps creaked under his weight. The air was damp, mineral. The air of underground places where temperature stayed constant regardless of the season above. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor, cinder block walls, exposed pipes sweating condensation. In the far corner, behind a defunct water heater, Harlan had built a plywood compartment roughly the size of a closet. It was crude, functional, and locked with a combination padlock that looked cheaper than it was. The lock was heavy gauge, military surplus, the kind you didn't buy at hardware stores. Combination? Mercer asked. Our anniversary, June 14th. Oh, 614. Mercer worked the dial. The lock popped. He removed it, opened the plywood door, and stood still. Inside the compartment, stacked on rough-cut shelves from floor to ceiling, was the paper trail of systematic institutional violence in Ridger County. Manila folders. Dozens of them. Each one labeled in Harlan's precise handwriting with a name, a date, and a case number that corresponded to nothing in any official database because every one of these cases had been erased from the system. Medical records from 3 different hospitals, ER intake forms, X-ray reports, treatment notes written by nurses who documented injuries consistent with domestic abuse, and then watched their documentation disappear from patient files within days. Photographs, Polaroids, printed digital images, time-stamped, showing bruises, fractures, black eyes, split lips, burns. The cartography of violence mapped across women's bodies with clinical precision. Complaint forms filed with the Ridger County Sheriff's Department, signed, dated, official, paired with system logs showing those same complaints deleted within 24 to 72 hours of filing. And at the center of every folder, recurring like a disease that kept metastasizing, one name, Deputy Cole Cross. But that wasn't what stopped Mercer's breathing. What stopped his breathing was the second name, the name that appeared on the authorization line of every deletion, the name that signed off on every buried complaint, every vanished medical record, every woman who'd walked into the system asking for help and walked out with nothing but the understanding that the system itself was part of the cage. Not Landry. Harlan. Mercer stared at the signature, pulled another folder. Same signature. Another. Same. He went through 6 folders with hands that had started trembling. Not from cold, not from fear, but from the tectonic shift happening in the foundation of everything he'd believed for 3 years. Harlan Voss, former president of the Night Reapers MC. The man Mercer had mourned, defended, and built a crusade around. The man whose death he'd attributed to Cole Cross and the corrupt machinery of Ridger County law enforcement. Harlan hadn't been collecting evidence against the system. He'd been part of it. The folders told the story in clinical, devastating detail. For over 4 years, Harlan had operated as an intermediary between the sheriff's department and the community, a fixer, a silencer, a man who used his position in the biker brotherhood to identify women who were being abused by law enforcement officers, approach them under the guise of protection, collect their statements and evidence, and then hand everything to Landry's office, where it was systematically destroyed. The women believed they were being helped. They trusted the biker who showed up with concerned eyes and strong hands, and the promise that someone outside the badge would fight for them. And Harlan took that trust and fed it into the same machine that was grinding them down. In exchange, the Night Reapers received operational immunity. No traffic stops, no raids, no warrant sweeps, no parole violations enforced. The club ran its business, legitimate and otherwise, under a blanket of institutional protection purchased with the silence of battered women. Mercer's hands stopped trembling. They went still. Completely, absolutely still. The stillness of a man who has reached the bottom of something and found it was deeper than he'd been prepared for. He picked up the last folder on the shelf. It was thinner than the others. Different. The label read, Insurance. Do not open unless necessary. Inside was a single typed letter. No signature, no date. Addressed to no one. The letter described, in detailed, unemotional language, the full scope of the arrangement between Harlan Voss and Sheriff Landry's office. Names, dates, transactions, the precise mechanics of how complaints were intercepted and evidence destroyed. It was written in the third person, as if its author were describing someone else's crimes. But the details were too specific, too intimate, too precisely aligned with the contents of the other folders to have been written by anyone except Harlan himself. At the bottom, a single handwritten line had been added in ink. If you're reading this, I tried to stop and they didn't let me. Mercer read the line 3 times. Then he set the letter down on the plywood shelf and placed both hands flat against the cinder block wall and breathed, long, slow breaths that shook on the exhale, the breathing of a man trying to hold his body together while his mind came apart. He'd built a mythology around a lie. 3 years of believing Harlan was a hero. 3 years of suspecting murder, of building outrage, of channeling grief into the conviction that one good man had been destroyed by a corrupt system. 3 years of leading the Night Reapers with the implicit promise that they would someday avenge their fallen president and bring down the machine that killed him. But Harlan hadn't been killed by the machine. He'd been a component of the machine, a gear, a mechanism, a man who'd traded women's suffering for operational freedom, and then, at some point, according to that final devastating handwritten line, tried to stop and discovered that the machine didn't have an exit. Mercer heard Claire's footsteps on the stairs behind him, slow, deliberate. The footsteps of a woman who already knew what he was finding because she'd found it 3 years ago. "You knew," Mercer said. He didn't turn around, couldn't. His voice was flat, emptied, the voice of a man speaking from inside the wreckage of his own convictions. "I found it after the funeral," Claire said. She stood on the bottom step, arms folded, her face a mask carved from 3 years of carrying a secret that had no safe place to live. Read every folder, every photograph, every name, and then I closed it up and spent 3 years pretending this basement didn't exist. Why didn't you tell anyone? Tell who? The police? They were the other half of the arrangement. The club? The club was benefiting from it. You? Claire's voice sharpened. You worshipped him, Mercer. Every man in that club worshipped him. He was your hero, your proof that an outlaw could be a good man. And I was supposed to… What? Walk into the clubhouse and tell you that the man you built your entire identity around was trading women's safety for your freedom? Mercer turned. His face was something Eden wouldn't have recognized. Stripped of armor, stripped of the hard-carved certainty that had defined him for as long as anyone had known him. Underneath was something raw and exposed, like muscle beneath torn skin. He was my brother, Mercer said. He was a lot of things. Claire's voice softened, not with forgiveness, but with the exhausted complexity of a woman who'd loved a complicated man and been forced to grieve him in a way that allowed no clean emotions. He wasn't evil, Mercer. He started the arrangement because the club was being targeted. Raids every month. Members going to prison on planted evidence. Families losing homes. Harlan made a deal to protect them, and the price of that deal was silence. The price was women. Yes, and he knew it, and it ate him alive. That last year, you saw him. You saw what was happening. The drinking, the weight loss, the way he couldn't look people in the eye. He was coming apart because he'd built a wall between what he believed and what he did, and the wall was cracking. So he decided to blow it up. He decided to collect enough evidence to reverse the arrangement. Copies of everything that had been destroyed. He got them from nurses, from hospital clerks, from women who'd kept their own records because they didn't trust the system. He was going to hand everything to a federal contact, walk away from the club, walk away from the deal, and let the whole thing burn. And Landry found out. I don't know. I don't know if it was Landry or Cole or someone else. I don't know who ran him off Road 11. All I know is that my husband spent 4 years helping a system he knew was wrong, then 1 year trying to destroy it, and then he was dead and I was alone with a basement full of paper that proves everything and fixes nothing. Mercer looked at the folders, stacked, organized, labeled, the meticulous archive of a man trying to document his own crimes, as if documentation alone could constitute atonement. It fixes something now, Mercer said. Does it? Claire descended the last step, stood on the concrete floor in her bare feet, cold and small and fierce. You're going to take these files and do what Harlan tried to do, and they're going to do to you what they did to him. You understand that? Maybe. Not maybe. Certainly. That's the math, Mercer. That's always been the math. One man against a system isn't courage. It's arithmetic. And the system always has bigger numbers. I'm not one man. No, you're 6 men, on motorcycles, with criminal records and trauma and the kind of heroic delusion that makes veterans think they're still invincible because they survived something that should have killed them. Claire's voice broke, repaired itself, broke again. And I've already buried one of you. I can't. I won't. She stopped, pressed her hand against her mouth, closed her eyes. Mercer crossed the basement and did something he hadn't done in years. He put his arms around Claire Harlan and held her, awkwardly, stiffly, the embrace of a man who'd forgotten the mechanics of human comfort, but remembered enough to try. She didn't cry. She shook, deep, structural tremors, the kind that come from a body that's been holding too still for too long. I'm not Harlan, Mercer said quietly. I'm not going to make deals with the machine. I'm going to break it. You can't break it from outside. That's what he learned. You can't. I'm not going to break it from outside. Claire pulled back, looked at him. Something in his eyes made her face change, a tightening, a recoil, the recognition of a plan she could see forming but couldn't yet name. What are you going to do? Mercer didn't answer. He began gathering the folders, stacked them carefully, methodically, the way a man stacks ammunition before a battle he expects to survive but doesn't require himself to. He took everything, every folder, every photograph, every medical record, every complaint form. The insurance letter went into the inside pocket of his cut, pressed against his chest, Harlan's final words resting against Mercer's heartbeat, like a dead man's confession keeping time with a living man's blood. He carried the boxes upstairs, through the kitchen, through the hallway with its photographs of a man who'd been two things at once and hadn't survived the contradiction. Out onto the porch where the fog was thinning and the first gray suggestion of dawn was bleeding into the eastern sky. The reapers waited at the tree line, 5 engines idling, 5 men who didn't know yet what Mercer had found, didn't know that the foundation they'd built their brotherhood on had a crack running through it wide enough to swallow them all. Claire stood in the doorway. "Mercer," he turned. "When they find out, the club, when they learn what Harlan did, they'll want to burn it all. Pretend it never happened. Protect the name. Will you let them?" Mercer looked at the boxes in his arms. The weight of them was nothing compared to what they contained. Years of silenced women, buried complaints, and the ugly truth that the Night Reaper's operational freedom had been purchased with other people's suffering. The patch on his back, Night Reaper's MC, suddenly felt heavier, like the letters themselves had absorbed the weight of every woman whose voice had been traded for the club's survival. "No," he said, "I won't let them." He walked to his bike, strapped the boxes to the sissy bar with bungee cords, hands working fast, mechanical. Decker watched from his saddle, reading Mercer's body language the way snipers read wind, measuring force, direction, the invisible currents that determined where damage would land. "What did you find?" Decker asked. "Not here. Clubhouse. All of us. Now." Decker heard something in those words that made his next question die unasked. He fired his engine without another word. The formation pulled out. 6 Harleys carving through dawn fog on empty county roads, heading toward a reckoning that none of them were prepared for. The clubhouse was a converted machine shop at the edge of an industrial lot on the west side of town. Corrugated steel walls, concrete floor stained with decades of oil and exhaust. A bar built from reclaimed barnwood, a meeting table scarred with cigarette burns and knife marks, and the circular stains of 1,000 bottles set down during 1,000 conversations that determined lives and futures, and the occasional disappearance of men who'd violated the code. Mercer set the boxes on the table. The 6 men stood around it, Decker, Preacher, Cortez Dutch, Needle, each of them carrying the remnants of the night in their faces and postures, rain-dried leather, bloodshot eyes, the low-grade exhaustion of men running on adrenaline and conviction. "Sit down," Mercer said. They sat. "What I'm about to tell you changes everything, and I mean everything. What this club is, what we think we are, and whether the patch on your back means what you believe it means." He paused. Let the weight of the words settle. "If anyone wants to walk out before I open these boxes, walk now. Because once you know what's inside, you can't unknow it." Nobody moved. Mercer opened the first box. He laid the folders out one by one, explained them without embellishment, without emotion, without the particular vocal distortion that comes from a man trying to soften a blow. He gave them the facts the way they'd been given to him, raw, sequential, undeniable. Harlan's arrangement with Landry, the buried complaints, the destroyed evidence, the systematic silencing of women who'd asked for help from a biker who was supposed to be their protector. The operational immunity the Night Reapers had enjoyed for years, immunity purchased with silence, maintained by complicity, and invisible to every man sitting at this table because Harlan had kept it invisible. The room changed as he spoke. Not loudly, not with eruptions or violence or the dramatic reactions that movies assign to moments of revelation. It changed the way a landscape changes during an earthquake, slowly, terribly, with a grinding sound that comes from things that were supposed to be permanent, proving that they weren't. Preacher was the first to react. He stood up. His chair scraped backward. He walked 3 steps toward the bar, stopped, put his hands on the wood, and stood there with his back to the room, breathing in deep, shuddering pulls that moved his entire body. "How long?" Preacher asked. Didn't turn around, couldn't. "At least 4 years. 4 years. Preacher's fingers dug into the barwood. 4 years of us riding clean because a man we trusted was... because he was... Yes. And Landry knew, the whole time. Landry built it. Harlan ran it. Cole benefited from it. The entire structure was designed so that no single person knew enough to bring it down alone. But Harlan kept copies. Everything that was destroyed in the official system, he duplicated. Every complaint, every photograph, every medical record. He was building an insurance policy. Cortez had his head in his hands, his fingers pressed into his skull like he was trying to hold his brain inside his body. The Leavenworth tattoo on his forearm, the date of his wrongful conviction, inked as a permanent reminder, seemed to darken under the garage lights. "The 3 years I did inside," Cortez said quietly. "Were those part of it? Was the immunity the reason I got targeted instead of the brass who actually committed the... I don't know, but it's possible." Cortez made a sound, low, guttural, the sound of a man discovering that the institution which imprisoned him and the brotherhood that rescued him afterward were branches of the same tree. Dutch hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, sat with his massive hands flat on the table, fingers spread, as if holding the surface down against some force trying to overturn it. His breathing was controlled, mate. Too controlled. The manufactured calm of a man who'd learned in combat that the moment you lose regulation is the moment people die. Needle's hands were shaking, both of them. The restless motion had intensified into something closer to seismic activity. His fingers trembling against the table, against his knees, against the arms of his chair. His medication was wearing off. The timing was catastrophic. He needed the stability that the VA regimen provided, and instead he was sitting in a clubhouse learning that the last stable structure in his life had been built on a lie. "What about us?" Needle asked. His voice was thin, fragile, a wire stretched to its last thread. "Right now. What happens to us right now? If Landry knows about these files, if he suspects we've found them, we're not bikers with a conscience, Mercer. We're witnesses, and witnesses in this county have a very specific life expectancy." The truth of it hung in the room like exhaust fumes, colorless, odorless, lethal in sufficient concentration. Mercer pulled the insurance letter from his cut, laid it on the table. Let them read it, one by one, passing it hand to hand like a document from a war they'd been fighting without knowing they were soldiers. "If you're reading this, I tried to stop, and they didn't let me." Preacher read it last. Set it down on the table with the careful precision of a man handling something that might explode. He turned from the bar and looked at Mercer with eyes that had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "He tried to get out," Preacher said, "and they killed him for it." "Yes." "And now we have the evidence he died for." "Yes." "And Cole Cross, the man we just declared war against 3 hours ago, already knows we're involved, already has our names, already has Landry's full support and the institutional machinery to bury every man in this room." "Yes." Preacher walked slowly back to the table, sat down, placed his hands flat on the surface beside Dutch's, 2 sets of scarred fingers pressed against scarred wood, 2 men holding the table down against the gravity of what they'd learned. "Then we're dead men," Preacher said, "unless we become something else." Mercer looked at him, at all of them. 5 faces staring back at him from the wreckage of everything they'd believed, scared, furious, shattered, still here, still at the table, still wearing the patch. "Harlan made a deal to protect this club," Mercer said, "and the price of that deal destroyed everything the club was supposed to stand for. I'm not making another deal. I'm not negotiating. I'm not filing these with a federal contact and waiting for a system that's already proven it can't be trusted. I'm going to take this evidence directly to Cole Cross's victims. Every woman in these folders, every name, every photograph, every buried complaint. I'm going to find them, give them back what was stolen, and let them decide what happens next." "That's not a plan," Preacher said. "That's a detonation." "Yes. Cole will come for us before you reach the second name. That's why we're not going to wait for Cole." Mercer's voice changed, dropped into a register that none of them had heard before. The voice of a man who'd reached the place past fear, past anger, past strategy, where the only thing left was the irreducible decision of what kind of man you were going to be when everything else had been stripped away. "We're going to him first." Outside the clubhouse, the sun broke the horizon, a thin line of gold cracking through gray clouds, spilling across the industrial lot, catching chrome and steel and the wet surfaces of 6 motorcycles parked in a row like soldiers awaiting orders. Mercer's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at the screen. A text. No caller ID. 3 words. Check on Eden. Mercer's blood went cold. He dialed Eden's number. It rang. Rang again. Rang 5 times. 6, 7. Voicemail. He dialed again. Same result. A 3rd time. Nothing. Decker was already on his feet. How far to the diner? 20 minutes. Make it 10. Mercer looked at the boxes on the table, at the evidence that could dismantle the most powerful institution in Ridger County, at the letter from a dead man who'd tried to stop and been stopped permanently. He left everything on the table, grabbed his keys, and ran. 6 engines fired simultaneously, a wall of sound, a thunder roll that shook the corrugated walls and sent pigeons scattering from the rooftop into pale morning sky. The bikes tore out of the lot and hit the county road at speed, formation tight, engines screaming through fog that was burning off fast under a sun that didn't care about the war happening beneath it. 20 minutes compressed into 9. When they reached Black Hollow Diner, the parking lot held a single vehicle that hadn't been there before. A Ridger County patrol car. Engine off. Lights off. Driver's door open. The diner's front window was shattered. Glass covered the parking lot asphalt in a glittering spread that caught the early morning sun and turned it into something that looked like ice or diamonds or the scattered remnants of something that used to be whole and never would be again. Mercer was off his bike before it stopped rolling. His boots hit glass. The crunch was the loudest sound in the world. Glass shards ground beneath Mercer's boots as he crossed the parking lot at a dead run, each step splitting fragments into smaller fragments, sunlight catching the debris in brief violent flashes that strobed across his vision like muzzle fire. The patrol car sat with its driver door hanging open, interior light still on, radio crackling low with dispatch chatter that nobody was listening to. The engine was cold. It had been here for a while. Mercer hit the diner's front door, and it swung inward without resistance. The lock was broken. The frame splintered where something heavy had been driven through it. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed the same way they always buzzed. Indifferent, mechanical, illuminating a room that looked like a small war had passed through it on its way to somewhere worse. Tables overturned, coffee mugs shattered across tile. The register was open, cash drawer pulled out, and thrown on the floor. Not robbery, theater, the staged appearance of a crime that wasn't the actual crime. Salt and pepper shakers rolled in slow circles on the linoleum, disturbed by the draft coming through the shattered front window. The jukebox had been knocked sideways, its glass front cracked in a spiderweb pattern. A record still spinning inside with the needle bouncing across dead grooves, producing a rhythmic clicking sound that filled the silence like a mechanical heartbeat. "Eden!" Mercer's voice tore through the diner. Raw, desperate, stripped of every layer of control he'd spent a decade constructing. No answer. He moved through the wreckage, past the overturned stools, past the counter where Eden had stood 3 hours ago telling a deputy sheriff that her diner wasn't a prison, past the kitchen doors that hung crooked on their hinges. The kitchen was empty, grill cold, fryers off. Briggs's apron hung on a hook near the walk-in cooler, abandoned. Decker came through the front door behind him, boots crunching glass, his one good eye scanning the room with the rapid, systematic sweep of a man trained to assess damage and identify threats in the same glance. "Blood," Decker said. Mercer turned. Decker was pointing at the counter. A smear, dark, partially dried, the brownish red of blood that had been exposed to air for an hour or more, ran along the edge of the laminate surface and dripped down the front in a pattern that suggested someone had been pressed against it. Hard. The smear was at chest height. The drip pattern indicated the person had been held there, then moved. More blood on the floor. A trail. Not heavy, not arterial, but consistent. Small drops leading from the counter toward the back hallway, toward the storeroom, toward the loading dock. Mercer followed the trail. His heart was doing something it hadn't done in years. Not since Korengal, not since the night his daughter was born. Not since the morning he woke up in a VA hospital and couldn't remember how he'd gotten there. It was beating too fast, too loud, each pulse visible in his neck and wrists, his body flooding with the particular chemical cocktail that combat veterans recognize as the precursor to either extreme violence or complete shutdown. The storeroom door was closed. Blood on the handle. Mercer opened it. Eden sat on the floor between stacked boxes of napkins and industrial cleaner, her back against the wall, her legs drawn up, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her left eye was swelling shut, purple-black, the bruise already darkening past the point of fresh impact into the deeper hues of established damage. Her lower lip was split. Blood had dried on her chin and the collar of her waitress uniform. Her right hand was cradled against her chest, the wrist bent at an angle that suggested either severe sprain or fracture. She was alive. She was conscious. And the look in her one good eye when she saw Mercer was something that rearranged every priority he'd ever established in his life. "He came back," Eden said. Her voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a person who's been through something enormous and has compressed the entire experience into a space small enough to hold without breaking. 30 minutes after you left. Alone. No Landry, no backup, just him. Mercer knelt beside her, didn't touch her, kept his hands visible, open, the same way he'd approached Lena hours earlier. The instinct of a man who understood that a woman who'd just been attacked didn't need another set of hands near her body, however well-intentioned. "Where's Briggs?" Mercer asked. "Hospital. Cole hit him first. Briggs tried to stop him, and Cole used his baton. Broke something in his shoulder. Briggs drove himself to County General." Eden paused. Swallowed. The movement made her wince, jaw pain probably, the kind that radiates from the point of impact through the entire side of the face. "Then it was just me." "What did he want?" "Lena. Where she went. The address. He knew I helped her. He knew about the truck, Briggs's truck. He said he'd already put out an APB on the plate. Said it was just a matter of time before they found her, and that when they did, everyone who helped her disappear would face obstruction charges at minimum." Eden's good eye found Mercer's face. "Then he asked about the files." The air left Mercer's lungs. "He asked about files?" "He said, his exact words, 'Your biker friend is looking for something that belongs to me. Files. Records. Things that a dead man kept in a dead man's house.'" He knew Mercer. He knew about Harlan's basement. He knew you'd go there. The anonymous text, "Check on Eden," someone had warned him. Someone who knew Cole's movements before they happened. Someone inside the machinery. Mercer's mind raced through the implications at a speed that felt physically dangerous, each connection sparking the next like a chain of detonations. Cole knew about the files, which meant Landry knew, which meant they'd known about Harlan's insurance policy for 3 years and had been waiting, not for the files to surface, but for someone to go looking for them, waiting to see who moved first. Using Harlan's archive as a trap, not a trap made of wire and spring, but a trap made of patience, the kind that lets the prey come to the bait rather than chasing it into open ground, and Mercer had walked directly into it. "Did he say anything else?" Mercer asked. Eden nodded slowly. "He said to tell you something. Exactly these words. The dead man's wife isn't the only one who's been keeping records. Tell Kane to check his own house before he tries to burn down mine." Mercer stood. The motion was abrupt, involuntary, the physical response of a body receiving information that couldn't be processed sitting down. He walked out of the storeroom, through the kitchen, into the diner's main floor where 5 night reapers stood amid broken glass and overturned furniture, each of them carrying the particular tension of men who'd arrived expecting a fight and found something worse, the aftermath of one they'd missed. "Needle," Mercer said. "Call your contact at County General. Find out about Briggs, condition, status, whether anyone from the sheriff's department is sitting on him." Needle nodded, phone already in hand, fingers trembling but functional. "Preacher, take Cortez, go back to the clubhouse. The files on the table, move them. Now. Not the safe house, not the storage unit. Somewhere disconnected from every property, every member, every address associated with this club. You've got 40 minutes before Cole gets a warrant." Preacher didn't argue, didn't question. The gravity of what was happening had compressed even his disagreements into silence. He and Cortez moved for the door. "Dutch." Mercer looked at the silent giant. "Stay with Eden. Don't leave her. Not for a minute. Not for a second. If anyone with a badge walks through that door, you call me, and then you do whatever you need to do." Dutch's massive hand settled on Eden's shoulder, gentle, impossibly gentle for its size. The way a man touches something he's been told is fragile and believes it. Eden looked up at him from her one good eye and saw something in his face that she'd been looking for in other people her entire life and never found. The absolute, unquestioning willingness to stand between her and harm, regardless of cost. Mercer turned to Decker. "With me." "Where?" The text came from someone inside the department. Someone who knew Cole was coming here before he arrived. Someone who's been watching this from the inside and just decided to show their hand. "How do we find them?" "We don't. They find us." Mercer pulled out his phone. The anonymous text still glowed on the screen. 3 words, no caller ID, a ghost's fingerprint on a digital surface. He typed a response. "Who are you?" Sent it. Waited. 10 seconds. 20. The diner's broken jukebox clicked its dead rhythm. Outside, morning traffic was beginning on the highway. Distant engines, normal lives, the mundane machinery of a world that didn't know a war was being fought in its margins. The phone buzzed. Parking lot, county courthouse. 20 minutes. Come alone. Mercer showed Decker the screen. "Trap," Decker said immediately. "Maybe. You're not going alone." "I have to." "The hell you—" "Decker." Mercer's voice dropped to the register that ended arguments, not with volume, but with the absolute finality of a man who'd made a decision and was no longer soliciting input. "If this is someone inside Landry's department willing to turn, we can't spook them. Multiple bikes, leather cuts, the whole operation, they'll vanish. I go alone. I go clean. No cut, no patch, no bike." "Your car?" Decker stared at him. His glass eye caught the fluorescent light, while his real eye burned with the particular fury of a man being asked to let someone he cares about walk into potential destruction. "If you're not back in 1 hour," Decker said, "I'm coming in with everyone. And I mean everyone." "Understood." Decker tossed his car keys. A Honda Civic, anonymous, forgettable, the kind of vehicle that disappeared in any parking lot. Mercer caught them, stripped his leather cut, handed it to Decker. The patch left his back for the first time in years. He felt its absence, the way an amputee feels a phantom limb. The weight was gone, but the neural pathways still fired, still expected the leather against his shoulders, still reached for an identity that was hanging in another man's hands. He drove to the courthouse in under 15 minutes. The county seat was a small town 10 miles east of the diner. 3 traffic lights, a hardware store, a pharmacy, a diner that wasn't Black Hollow, and the Ridger County Courthouse, a 2-story brick building with columns that hadn't been cleaned since they were installed and a parking lot that held 30 vehicles at capacity. It held 6 now. Early morning. Government workers hadn't arrived yet. The lot was mostly empty, gray asphalt shimmering with residual moisture from last night's rain. Mercer parked in the far corner, killed the engine, sat with his hands on the steering wheel, and waited. A sedan pulled into the lot 3 minutes later, dark blue, government plates, tinted windows. It parked 2 spaces from Mercer's vehicle, close enough to talk, far enough to run. The driver's window lowered. Mercer looked and felt something shift in his understanding of the entire situation. A final piece falling into a puzzle he hadn't known was incomplete. The driver was a woman, mid-30s, short dark hair, no makeup. Uniform, Ridger County Sheriff's Department, Patrol Division. Her name tag read Vasquez. Her face was tight with the particular combination of fear and resolve that Mercer had seen in every person who'd ever decided to betray an institution they'd once believed in. "Deputy Vasquez," Mercer said, "don't use my name." Her voice was low, rapid, the voice of someone operating on a timer. "I've got 12 minutes before my shift starts, and the dash cam on this vehicle is disabled, but the lot cameras are not, so we're 2 people who happen to park near each other having a conversation. Understood?" "Understood." "You found Harlan's files. How do you know about them?" "Because I was one of the women in them." The words hit Mercer like a physical blow. He gripped the steering wheel harder, leather creaking under his fingers, and looked at Deputy Vasquez with new eyes. Saw the tension in her shoulders, the controlled breathing, the way her hands sat in her lap with deliberate stillness, the posture of a woman who'd been holding a secret so long it had become structural, load-bearing, the thing that kept the rest of her standing. When? Mercer asked. 6 years ago, before I wore the badge, before I became the thing that hurt me. Her jaw tightened. My ex was patrol, beat me for 18 months. I filed a complaint with the department. 2 days later, the complaint vanished and my ex got a commendation. 3 weeks after that, a biker showed up at my apartment, said he could help, said he had people who could protect me. Harlan. He took my statement, took photographs, took copies of my medical records, promised me the evidence would be used to build a case, promised me I'd be safe. Vasquez's composure cracked along a fault line she'd been maintaining for years. I never heard from him again. My ex transferred out of county 6 months later, voluntarily, or so the paperwork said. I joined the academy because I thought if the system failed from the inside, maybe it needed someone inside who knew what failure looked like. And you've been inside ever since. 5 years. Watching Cole Cross do to women what my ex did to me. Watching Landry cover it. Watching complaints disappear the same way mine did. I've been documenting everything, my own records, separate from Harlan's. Timestamps. Dispatch logs. Deleted incident reports I recovered from backup servers before they were purged. I have digital evidence that Harlan's physical files can corroborate. Mercer's hands went still on the wheel. The tactical landscape shifted beneath him. Not slightly, not incrementally, but fundamentally. 2 evidence chains. Physical and digital. Independent of each other. Cross-referenced, they wouldn't just threaten the system. They'd be irrefutable. Why now? Mercer asked. You've had this for years. Why reach out tonight? Because tonight Cole crossed a line even I wasn't prepared for. He beat a civilian, a waitress, in her own place of business because she helped a woman he considers his property. And then he came back to the station and filed a report claiming the diner was vandalized by unknown persons, forged a crime scene, created a paper trail that makes him the investigating officer on a case he committed. Vasquez's voice hardened. I've watched him bend the law for 3 years. Tonight he broke it, and Landry signed off. Again. The forged report. You have a copy? I have the original on a department server, time-stamped. I have the actual dispatch log showing no call was made about a vandalism at Black Hollow Diner. And I have Cole's badge access record showing he was logged out of the station when the supposed incident was reported, meaning he couldn't have received the call he claims dispatched him. She paused. It's enough to trigger a federal investigation. If someone files the complaint, why can't you? Because whistleblower protection doesn't extend to county law enforcement in this state without a federal receiver already in place. If I file internally, Landry buries it. If I file externally without cover, I'm dead. Not figuratively, literally, the way Harlan is dead. Mercer looked at her, at the uniform she wore, but the same uniform Cole Cross wore, the same badge, the same institutional architecture that had been designed to protect and had been repurposed to destroy. She wore it like a disguise, like armor turned inside out, like a woman who'd walked into the belly of the thing that ate her and had been surviving on its insides for 5 years, gathering evidence, building a case, waiting for someone outside to reach in. What do you need from me? Mercer asked. A civilian complainant, someone withstanding, someone who was directly harmed by Cole Cross and is willing to sign a federal affidavit. With that, I can trigger a Bureau of Justice inquiry that supersedes county jurisdiction. Landry can't bury what he doesn't control. Eden Vale. She has visible injuries. She's a business owner who was assaulted in her own establishment by a sworn officer. If she's willing to sign, the federal process starts within 72 hours. And in those 72 hours? Vasquez looked at him. Her eyes were dark, steady, the eyes of a woman who'd calculated the cost of every possible action and inaction and chosen the option that would cost her everything but leave her intact. In those 72 hours, Cole Cross will know someone inside the department moved against him. He'll know because the federal inquiry requires notification to the county sheriff. And when he knows, she stopped, started again. He won't wait for the process. He'll destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, and clean house. That means everyone connected to this, you, your club, the waitress, the woman you sent north, and me, becomes a target that needs to be neutralized before federal investigators arrive. You're talking about a siege. I'm talking about 72 hours of survival against a man who controls the entire law enforcement apparatus of this county and has nothing left to lose. Mercer sat in the borrowed Honda Civic in a government parking lot at sunrise and felt the architecture of his entire plan restructure itself around a new reality. This wasn't a slow burn anymore. This wasn't gathering evidence and building a case and methodically dismantling a system. This was a countdown. 72 hours. 3 days. The same amount of time that Maisie had gone without eating. The symmetry was cruel and precise. "I'll get Eden to sign," Mercer said. "Today. It has to be today. Federal office in Merritt County. It's across the state line, outside Landry's jurisdiction. I have a contact there. Agent named Torres. She's been building a broader corruption case against rural departments for 2 years. Your evidence, Harlan's files plus mine, gives her enough to move. And you? What happens to you when this starts?" Vasquez's jaw worked. The question wasn't tactical, it was personal. And she heard the personal in it. The recognition from one damaged person to another that the cost of doing the right thing was never abstract, never theoretical, never distributed evenly across the population of people who benefited from it. "I disappear for a while," she said. "I have a plan. I've had a plan for 3 years. The uniform comes off, and it stays off. And I become someone else in a place where nobody knows what Ridger County is or what happened inside it." "You shouldn't have to disappear." "No, I shouldn't. But I've been a woman in a system built by men like Cole Cross for long enough to know that should is the most expensive word in the English language." She reached across the console and handed Mercer a flash drive. Small, black, unremarkable. "Everything I have. Digital. Encrypted. The password is the date on your former president's death certificate. I figured that was something you'd know and Cole wouldn't think to try." Mercer took the drive. It weighed almost nothing. It contained the destruction of an empire. 12 minutes are up," Vasquez said. She put her car in gear. Her window began to rise. "One more thing. Cole has a second phone. Personal. Not department issue. He uses it for communications he doesn't want on official channels. Last night he made a call at 2:47 a.m., 20 minutes after leaving the diner the first time. I don't know who he called, but the duration was 11 minutes. Whoever's on the other end of that call is the person who tells Cole what to do. Not Landry. Someone above Landry." The window sealed. The sedan pulled out of the lot. Mercer watched it merge into traffic and vanish into the ordinary morning flow of a county that didn't know its infrastructure was about to be detonated. He drove back to the diner, fast. The Honda's engine whined at speeds it wasn't designed for. The county roads blurred past. Farmland, fences, the skeletal remains of a barn that had collapsed years ago and been left to rot because nobody cared enough to clear it. The metaphor was too precise to acknowledge. Black hollow diner. The shattered window gaped like a wound. Dutch's silhouette was visible through the gap. Massive, stationary, a human barricade. Mercer walked in. Glass crunching. Morning light flooding through the broken window, turning the destroyed dining room into something that looked almost beautiful in the way that wreckage sometimes does when the light hits it from the right angle. Eden was sitting at the counter now, an ice pack, frozen peas wrapped in a dish towel, pressed against her swollen eye. Her injured wrist had been splinted with a wooden spoon and duct tape, Dutch's work, crude but effective, the field medicine of men who'd treated worse with less. "I need to ask you something," Mercer said. No preamble, no softening. There wasn't time. "And I need you to understand what I'm asking before you answer." Eden lowered the ice pack. Her one good eye was clear, focused, sharpened by pain into something brighter than it had been before the pain existed. "A federal affidavit, your name, your statement, your injuries documented by a federal agent in Merritt County. Today. It triggers an investigation that takes this out of Landry's hands permanently. But the moment you sign, Cole knows someone moved. And he'll have 72 hours to respond before federal authority supersedes his. 72 hours. During which you're a target. I'm already a target. He already came for me. Eden gestured at her face, her wrist, the destroyed diner around them. "This happened because I gave a child pancakes, Mercer. This is what institutional power looks like when you challenge it with breakfast food. So don't stand there asking me if I understand the risk. I'm wearing the risk." Mercer felt something in his chest that he didn't have time to examine. Something warm and sharp and dangerous. The kind of emotion that gets people killed in combat because it makes them protect one person instead of the mission. Dutch drives you. Decker follows. You sign in Merritt County and you don't come back here. Not for 72 hours. Not until federal investigators are on the ground. And my diner? We'll be here when this is over. Will it? Eden looked around the room. At the shattered glass, the overturned tables, the broken jukebox clicking its dead rhythm. At 3 years of her life arranged across a space that someone with a badge had destroyed in minutes. Or will it be another thing I lose because I made the mistake of being decent? Mercer didn't have an answer for that. The honest answer was maybe. Maybe the diner would survive and maybe it wouldn't, and maybe the concept of survival itself was a luxury that people in their position couldn't afford to calculate. So he said nothing, which was its own kind of honesty, and Eden read it and accepted it the way she'd accepted everything else that night, with the exhausted clarity of a woman who'd stopped expecting comfort and started expecting truth. Let's go, she said. They moved. Dutch helped Eden into Decker's car. Carefully, his enormous hands guiding her like she was made of something precious and breakable, which she was, which everyone was, which was the whole point of everything that was happening. Decker took the wheel. They pulled out, heading east toward the state line. Mercer watched them go. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed Preacher. Files secure? Moved. We're at the fallback. Everyone accounted for? A pause. The kind of pause that contained information nobody wanted to transmit. Needle's gone. Mercer's world tilted. What do you mean, gone? He was at the clubhouse when Cortez and I arrived, helped us move the first load. Then he stepped outside for a smoke and didn't come back. His bike's still here. His phone's on the workbench. He just walked away. Mercer closed his eyes. Needle. The thin, wiry man with restless hands and a VA regimen that was the only thing standing between him and the darkness. The man whose medication was wearing off at the worst possible moment, whose stability depended on routine and structure and the fragile architecture of a life rebuilt from the wreckage of combat trauma. His VA appointment, Mercer said. When was it? This morning, 8 a.m. He missed it. That means he missed his medication pickup. Mercer, if he's off his meds and walking, I know. He knows everything. The files, the plan, Eden, Lena, Vasquez. I know. If Cole finds him, I know, Preacher. Silence on the line. Two men breathing across a digital connection, each calculating the same horrifying arithmetic. A traumatized veteran off his medication, in psychological freefall, walking through a county controlled by a man who'd demonstrated willingness to beat a waitress for information. If Cole Cross found Needle before the Reapers did, the 72-hour countdown would collapse. Every name, every location, every element of the plan would be extracted from a man whose mind was already disintegrating under the weight of chemical imbalance and the shattering revelation that his brotherhood had been built on betrayal. Find him, Mercer said. Split up. Every street, every bar, every bench, every bridge in this county. Find him before Cole does. He hung up. Stood in the parking lot of his destroyed diner. Not his diner, Eden's diner, but somehow his now too, bound to it by the blood on the counter and the glass on the ground, and the particular gravity of a place where everything had started with a child's whisper and a plate of pancakes. His phone buzzed again. Not the anonymous number this time. A number he recognized, Cole Cross. Mercer answered. You've been busy, Cole said. His voice was calm, conversational, the voice of a man who had breakfast plans and was discussing them with a colleague. The waitress is gone. Your one-eyed friend is driving her east. Smart. Merritt County, federal jurisdiction. Agent Torres, good choice. She's been circling this county for 2 years, never had enough to land. Mercer's blood crystallized. Cole knew. Already. Less than 30 minutes since the plan had formed, and Cole already knew Eden's route, Decker's involvement, and the name of the federal agent. How? Mercer asked. One word. All he could manage. You think I spent 3 years building a machine and left it with only one engine? Landry's useful, but Landry's local. The real architecture, The thing that actually keeps this county running the way it runs, that's above Landry, above county, above state. Cole paused. A long theatrical pause. A man enjoying the sound of his own revelation. You want to know who Harlan called before he died? Who he tried to hand those files to? His federal contact. Mercer's hand tightened on the phone until the screen cracked under his thumb. Agent Torres, Cole said. His federal contact was Agent Torres, and she's been mine since before Harlan ever learned her name. The phone went silent. Mercer stood in the broken parking lot of Black Hollow Diner with cracked glass under his boots and a cracked phone in his hand and the cracked remains of every plan he'd built collapsing around him like a structure that had been rigged to fall from the moment the first beam was laid. Torres was compromised. The federal path was a dead end. Eden was driving toward an agent who would take her statement and bury it the same way every other statement had been buried. Professionally, quietly, with the institutional efficiency of a system designed to digest dissent and excrete silence. Mercer dialed Decker. No answer. Dialed again. No answer. A third time, his fingers leaving blood on the cracked screen from where the glass had cut his thumb. The call connected. Background noise, highway wind, engine hum, a car moving fast. Decker, turn around. What? Torres is compromised. She's Cole's asset. Has been for years. Turn around. Do not take Eden to Merritt County. Do not. The line went dead. Not disconnected. Dead. The flat, absolute silence of a signal that has been terminated from outside, jammed, blocked, intercepted by equipment that county departments didn't have, but that someone above county, above state, might. Mercer looked at the phone, at the dead screen, at the empty highway stretching east toward a state line and a federal office, and a woman named Torres who'd been waiting for exactly this, waiting for someone to bring evidence to her door so she could close that door and lock it and add another file to the cabinet of things that would never see daylight. He had no phone, no contact with Decker, no contact with Eden, no federal path, no institutional allies, a missing brother whose mind was fracturing. Evidence scattered across a county that was waking up to an ordinary morning while extraordinary machinery moved beneath its surface. And somewhere on a highway heading east, a woman with a broken wrist and a split lip was riding toward the one person she'd been told would save her, not knowing that the savior and the system were the same thing wearing different faces. Mercer walked to his Harley, straddled it. The engine fired with a sound like a war drum finding its rhythm after a long silence. Chrome caught the morning sun. The exhaust note bounced off the diner's corrugated walls and came back doubled, tripled, a sound that carried across the parking lot and down the highway and into the morning air of Ridger County like a declaration that something loud and fast and beyond institutional control was coming. He had one option left. The option that existed past strategy, past planning, past the careful architecture of evidence and process and legal framework. The option that lived in the place where men went when every system failed and every path closed, and the only thing left was the raw, irreducible decision to move toward danger because someone you'd promised to protect was inside it. He opened the throttle. The Harley screamed east, and somewhere ahead, through morning fog and highway miles and the accumulated wreckage of 3 years of institutional corruption, Eden Vale sat in the passenger seat of a car she trusted, heading toward a woman she'd been told would help, not knowing that the trap had been set long before she'd ever poured coffee for a hungry child in a diner at midnight, and that the only person who knew the truth was a scarred, broken biker on a screaming motorcycle, racing against a machine that had been designed, from the very beginning, to win. The Harley ate highway like a starving animal. Mercer rode at 106 miles per hour on a road built for 60. The engine screaming beneath him, wind tearing at his jacket, his eyes burning from speed and cold morning air, and the particular chemical composition of a man running on adrenaline and dread. The highway stretched east through farmland and fog, 2 lanes of cracked asphalt bordered by drainage ditches and fence posts and the occasional dead tree standing like a sentinel watching the world decay around it. He had no phone, no way to reach Decker, no way to warn Eden, nothing but speed and the raw mathematics of distance. Merritt County was 40 minutes east at legal speed, 25 at the pace he was keeping, and Decker had a 15-minute head start in a car that couldn't outrun a motorcycle on open road. The state line appeared at mile marker 114. A green sign, faded, shot through with .22 holes from years of bored teenagers. Mercer blew past it doing 112. The road surface changed, smoother, better maintained, the pavement of a county that had slightly more tax revenue and slightly fewer reasons to let its infrastructure rot. 8 miles past the line, he saw them. Decker's car, the anonymous Honda, parked on the shoulder ahead. Brake lights still glowing. Driver's door open. And beside it, Decker himself, standing on the roadside with his phone in his hand and his glass eye catching the morning sun and his face wearing an expression that Mercer had seen exactly once before, in Fallujah, when their convoy had driven into an ambush and the first IED detonated 50 meters ahead and the only option was to reverse into the second one waiting behind them. Mercer skidded to a stop. Gravel sprayed. The Harley's rear tire screamed against asphalt. "She's not in the car," Decker said, before Mercer's boots hit the ground. Mercer's vision contracted. "What?" "She's not in the car. I stopped because I got your call. Caught the first 3 seconds before the signal died. Heard Torres and compromised. Pulled over. Turned around in my seat to tell her." Decker paused, his jaw clenched. "She was already gone." "Gone how?" "The passenger door was unlocked. She must have opened it when I was focused on the road. I didn't hear it over the highway noise. She rolled out, at speed, Mercer, at 50 miles an hour. And she rolled out because she heard me say Torres on the phone, and she understood before I did." Mercer looked at the Honda. The passenger door hung open. On the shoulder behind it, scuff marks in the gravel, the drag pattern of a body that had hit ground at speed and tumbled. No blood visible. But the marks ran 15 feet before stopping at the drainage ditch, where the tall grass was flattened in a shape that suggested someone had landed, paused, and then moved. Eden had jumped from a moving car to avoid being delivered to a compromised federal agent. She'd understood the trap from 3 seconds of overheard phone conversation and made the calculation, the insane, desperate, survival-level calculation, that road rash at 50 miles an hour was preferable to walking into an office where her statement would be buried and her name added to a list of problems to be solved. "Which direction?" Mercer asked. Decker pointed south, away from the highway, into farmland, open fields, a tree line in the distance, a county road running parallel, maybe half a mile away. Terrain that offered cover but not comfort, hiding but not safety. "How long ago?" 6 minutes. 6 minutes. On foot. Injured. Broken wrist, split lip, swollen eye, and now whatever damage a 50-mile-per-hour exit from a moving vehicle had added to the inventory. 6 minutes of a woman running through wet grass and morning fog with the accumulated wreckage of the last 12 hours written across her body in bruises and road burns. Mercer left the bike, went on foot. Through the drainage ditch, water soaking his boots to the ankle, cold mud pulling at his soles. Into the field. Ankle-high grass, wet, heavy with dew that soaked his jeans within 20 steps. The fog was thinning but still present, turning the landscape into something impressionistic, shapes dissolving at their edges, distance becoming approximate. He found her at the tree line. She was sitting against an oak, not collapsed, not unconscious, but sitting with deliberate precision, her back against bark, her legs extended, her injured wrist cradled in her lap. Her waitress uniform was torn at the shoulder and knee. Road rash covered her right forearm, raw, weeping, embedded with gravel. Her face was a landscape of damage, the swollen eye from coal, the split lip from coal, and now fresh abrasions on her chin and forehead from the road. She was breathing, she was conscious, and she was holding Decker's car keys in her good hand. She'd pulled them from the ignition when she bailed, Mercer realized. She'd jumped from a car at highway speed and had the presence of mind to take the keys so the car couldn't follow her. "Torres is dirty," Eden said. Her voice was wrecked, raw from wind, thick with pain, but steady, unwavering. "I heard Decker on the phone. 3 seconds was enough." "I know. So there's no federal path." "No. And Cole knows everything." "Yes." Eden looked at him. One good eye, clear as winter glass. "Then what's left?" Mercer knelt beside her, His knees pressed into wet earth. The oak branches above them dripped residual rain in slow, irregular drops that landed on his shoulders and her hair and the ground between them. "You," Mercer said. "You're what's left. Your injuries, your testimony, your willingness to stand in front of a camera and say what happened." A camera. Not federal. Not institutional. Not anything connected to any system Cole can reach. Mercer's mind was working at a speed that felt dangerous, connections forming faster than he could evaluate them. A combat brain solving a problem that wasn't combat, but felt like it. The same stakes, the same time pressure, the same consequence for failure. Public, press, media. Someone outside every system. Someone who can't be buried because the signal is already out before anyone can stop it. Eden stared at him. "You want me to go public? I want you to go nuclear. Every bruise, every injury, every detail of what Cole Cross did in that diner, plus Harlan's files, plus Vasquez's digital evidence. All of it. Released simultaneously, not to one reporter, not to one outlet, to every newsroom, every independent journalist, every digital platform that will carry it. A detonation so large and so public that no amount of institutional machinery can contain the blast." The plan was not elegant. It was not strategic. It was the opposite of everything Mercer had been trained to do. It was loud where he'd been taught to be quiet, visible where he'd been taught to be invisible, uncontrolled where he'd been taught to control every variable. But elegance and strategy required functional systems, and every system had been compromised, and the only weapon left was the one that couldn't be jammed, blocked, or intercepted. The truth, broadcast so widely and so loudly that suppression itself became evidence of the thing being suppressed. "Cole will come for me before it goes out," Eden said, not arguing, calculating. "Cole will try." "And what stops him?" Mercer looked at her. The answer was in his eyes before he said it. The answer that had been true since the moment a child tugged a waitress's sleeve in a diner at midnight and whispered 3 words that rearranged the moral architecture of everyone who heard them. "I do," Mercer said. They moved. Decker met them at the tree line, his car repositioned on the county road, engine running. Eden climbed into the back seat with a grimace that she converted into silence through sheer force of will. Mercer took the passenger seat. Decker drove. Not east anymore. Not toward Merritt County and the compromised federal office, but north, toward the state line, toward Bramble Creek Road and a farmhouse with a blue mailbox and a woman named Greta Voss who didn't ask questions and didn't answer phones she didn't recognize. They arrived in 40 minutes. The farmhouse was exactly what Decker had described. Set back from the road, surrounded by cleared land that offered sight lines in every direction, bordered by forest on the north side. 2 Rottweilers announced their arrival from behind a chain-link fence. The blue mailbox at the end of the driveway was faded but visible. Greta Voss met them on the porch. She was 60, heavy-set, with hands that had worked earth and engines and other people's emergencies for decades. Her face was a geography of competence. No panic, no questions, just the immediate assessment of a woman who'd been sheltering people longer than most institutions had existed. Lena was inside. Maisie was asleep. Briggs's truck was parked in the barn. The next 4 hours happened with the compressed intensity of a military operation conducted by people who weren't military but had absorbed enough of its discipline to function under pressure. Mercer called Preacher from Greta's landline, the only phone Cole couldn't track. The files were secure. Preacher and Cortez were mobile. They'd found Needle. The story of Needle's disappearance was smaller than a tragedy and larger than a footnote. He'd walked 6 miles from the clubhouse to the VA parking lot and sat on a bench outside the entrance for 2 hours, hands shaking, mind fracturing along fault lines that his medication usually held together. A VA nurse named Patricia found him during her smoke break, recognized the 1,000-yard stare, the trembling hands, the look of a man who'd been pushed past the edge of what his chemistry could sustain. She brought him inside. Emergency medication. A quiet room. A blanket. When Preacher found him, Needle was sedated, stable, and apologetic in the particular way that veterans apologize for their own breakdowns. Quietly, with shame, as if the involuntary collapse of a traumatized nervous system was a personal failure rather than the predictable consequence of asking a wounded human being to bear more weight than any human being should have to carry. He hadn't talked, not to anyone outside the VA. The secret held. Mercer sent Preacher and Cortez to retrieve the files from the fallback location and bring them to Greta's farmhouse. He sent Decker to the one person in 3 counties he trusted with technology, a former Army signals specialist named Yates, who'd been dishonorably discharged for leaking evidence of contractor fraud and had spent the subsequent decade running a one-man digital archive out of a trailer in the woods. Yates didn't believe in institutions. He believed in bandwidth, and he had more of it than most small-town television stations. By early afternoon, the farmhouse kitchen table held everything. Harlan's physical files, every folder, every photograph, every buried complaint. Vasquez's flash drive, decrypted using the date from Harlan's death certificate, November 16th, yielding a digital archive that mirrored and expanded the physical one. Eden's injuries were photographed by Greta with a digital camera, time-stamped, documented with the clinical precision of a woman who'd been doing this long enough to know that evidence needed to be courtroom grade, even when there was no courtroom in sight. And Eden's statement, written in her own hand on paper, at Greta's kitchen table, with a cup of coffee going cold beside her and her broken wrist splinted properly now with materials from Greta's first aid supplies. She wrote for 90 minutes, didn't stop, didn't edit, didn't soften. She wrote the way she'd spoken to Cole in the diner, directly, without apology, without the particular deference that women in small counties learn to apply to their interactions with institutional power as a survival mechanism. Yates arrived at 3 p.m. in a rusted van with a satellite uplink on the roof and enough digital infrastructure to broadcast from a cornfield to every connected device on the planet. He was thin, bearded, intense in the way that people who've been proved right by events and punished for it tend to be. He looked at the materials, looked at Mercer, looked at Eden. "You understand what happens when I push the button," Yates said. "Tell me." Every major newsroom in the region gets a simultaneous data package: files, photographs, medical records, Eden's statement, Vasquez's digital evidence, plus the metadata showing deletion timestamps, the chain of custody proving systematic destruction of complaints, and Cole's forged incident report from this morning, paired with the actual dispatch log showing no call was made. I send it encrypted to 57 outlets simultaneously. The moment one picks it up, the rest follow. Within 12 hours, this is national. And Cole? Cole becomes the most visible corrupt officer in America overnight, which means he becomes the most dangerous person in this county for exactly as long as it takes the story to outrun his ability to suppress it. After that, he becomes the most visible target for every federal agency, every journalist, every citizen group that's been waiting for exactly this kind of case. Mercer looked at Eden. "Your call." Eden looked at the files on the table, at the photographs of women she'd never met. Women with bruises like hers, with fear like hers, with the particular damage that comes from being hurt by someone who's supposed to protect you. She looked at Lena, who stood in the kitchen doorway holding a sleeping Maisie, her face raw and open, and watching Eden with the expression of a woman who understood that what happened in the next 60 seconds would determine whether the machine that had consumed her life would consume others. "Push it," Eden said. Yates pushed it. The signal went out at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. A digital detonation that traveled at the speed of light through fiber optic cables and satellite relays and cellular networks, carrying the accumulated evidence of years of institutional violence into the inboxes of 57 newsrooms, and the awareness of a world that had been going about its business, unaware that a county in the American interior had been operating a domestic abuse protection racket funded by silence and maintained by badges. What happened next happened fast and slow simultaneously. The first calls came within 30 minutes. Reporters, producers, editors verifying authenticity. Yates fielded them from the van with the particular calm of a man who'd been preparing for exactly this moment for a decade. The second wave came within 2 hours. State police, not Ridger County. State level, responding to the story as it broke across regional media, reaching out through channels that bypassed Landry's office entirely. A trooper named Mackenzie arrived at the farmhouse in person. He was tall, young, uncomfortable in the way that law enforcement becomes uncomfortable when confronted with evidence that other law enforcement has failed catastrophically. He took Eden's statement, officially, on camera. With Greta Voss as a witness and Mercer standing in the corner of the kitchen, arms folded, watching the process with the vigilance of a man who'd learned that trust was a luxury he could no longer afford, but that verification was a discipline he could still practice. The third wave came at sunset. Colecross was arrested at 7:14 p.m. outside his home by state police officers who'd been dispatched from 2 counties away to avoid any contamination from local department loyalty. He resisted. He was subdued. He was placed in the back of a patrol car that was not from Ridger County and driven to a facility that was not in Ridger County and booked on charges that were not filed by anyone in Ridger County. Landry was arrested 40 minutes later, at his home, in his hunting jacket. The gold watch on his wrist caught the patrol car's lights as they cuffed him. Agent Torres's involvement surfaced within the week. Federal Internal Affairs, triggered by Vasquez's metadata showing communication patterns between Torres's office and Cole's personal phone. The investigation expanded. Other names surfaced, other counties. The machine Mercer had thought was local turned out to be regional, and the detonation Eden had authorized turned out to be larger than anyone had anticipated. But that was later. That was weeks and months in the slow, grinding mechanics of institutional accountability catching up to institutional failure. What mattered? What Mercer would remember when he remembered this story, which he would, in the small hours of sleepless nights for the rest of his life, was the evening. The evening after. Greta's farmhouse, 7 p.m., the sun going down behind the tree line in bands of gold and copper and the deep, bruised purple that comes after storms. The kitchen smelled like coffee and soup and the particular warmth of a space that has been filled with too many people and not enough chairs and somehow works anyway. Eden sat at the table with her wrist properly splinted now. The state trooper had called for an EMT who'd arrived, examined her, recommended a hospital visit she'd declined, and settled for a professional splint and painkillers she accepted with the particular gratitude of a woman who'd been running on adrenaline for 18 hours and had finally been given permission to hurt. Lena sat across from her. Maisie was on her lap, awake now, eating soup with the careful concentration of a child who'd learned in the last 24 hours that food was available and safe and didn't need to be consumed with desperate speed. The night reapers were scattered through the house. Preacher on the porch, smoking, staring at the sunset with the exhausted introspection of a man who'd spent the day rearranging his understanding of his own history. Cortez in the living room, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, eyes closed but not sleeping, processing, metabolizing, doing the internal work of a man whose wrongful conviction might have been connected to the very system that had just been exposed. Dutch on the porch steps, silent, massive, watching the dogs in the yard with an expression that might have been peace if peace were available to men like him. Needle arrived at dusk. Preacher drove to the VA and collected him, medicated, stable, fragile, in the way that recently shattered things are fragile even after they've been reassembled. He walked into the kitchen and looked at Mercer, and his restless hands went still, and his eyes filled, and he said nothing, because there was nothing to say that his presence didn't already communicate. I'm here. I came back. I didn't break. Decker stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, his glass eye facing the room and his real eye facing the window, maintaining surveillance even now, even here, even in a moment of something approaching safety, because men like Decker understood that safety was a condition, not a location, and conditions could change. Mercer stood at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He was watching Maisie eat soup. The child used her spoon with careful precision, lifting each bite to her mouth with both hands, blowing on the hot liquid the way someone had taught her. Someone, probably Lena, in a kitchen in a house where the knife drawer was bolted shut and silence was safer than sound. She ate slowly now, not desperately the way she'd eaten pancakes 14 hours ago. Slowly. The pace of a child who is beginning to understand, in the wordless way that children understand things, that the emergency was ending and the next meal would come when the next meal was supposed to come. Mercer. He turned. Lena stood beside him, close enough that he could see the bruises on her neck above the turtleneck she still wore, yellowing now at the edges, the body's slow process of converting damage into memory. "I need to say something to you," Lena said. "You don't need to say anything. I need to say it. Not for you. For me." She looked at her daughter, at the soup, at the spoon in small hands. 12 hours ago, I was sitting in a diner booth at midnight, convinced that the world was a machine designed to grind women like me into dust. That there was no help, no protection, no one who would stand between my daughter and the man who was destroying us. And then a waitress brought pancakes and a biker sat down and asked my child about cartoons, and her voice failed, rebuilt. "You didn't save me, Mercer. I saved myself. I've been saving myself for 3 years, but you were the first person who stood in the doorway and said, 'She's not leaving with you,' and meant it. And I need you to know that those 5 words changed what I thought was possible." Mercer looked at her, at the bruises, at the eyes above them. Not hunted anymore, not prey, but something else. Something that had survived the hunt and come out the other side carrying knowledge that couldn't be unlearned. "I had a daughter," Mercer said, quietly. The way he'd said it in the diner, a lifetime ago. "I still don't know where she is. I might never know. But tonight, in this kitchen, watching your daughter eat soup..." He stopped, swallowed. The crack in the concrete deepened. "It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't replace anything. But it reminds me why the broken parts still matter." Lena didn't touch him, didn't embrace him. She simply stood beside him at the counter and let the silence hold what words couldn't, and that was enough. And they both knew it was enough, and the knowing itself was a kind of healing that didn't require language. Maisie finished her soup, looked up, saw Mercer. "You're still sad," she said. Mercer felt something crack in his chest, not breaking, not this time, but opening, the way ice cracks on a river in spring, not destruction, thaw. "A little less tonight, kid," he said. Maisie nodded, satisfied with this answer in the way that children are satisfied with emotional honesty, even when they can't fully comprehend it. She returned to her soup bowl, chasing the last drops with her spoon, and the sound of metal against ceramic filled the kitchen with a small, ordinary music that was more beautiful than anything the broken jukebox at Black Hollow had ever played. The night settled. Stars appeared through the kitchen window, cold, distant, indifferent to the drama below them but present, which was sometimes enough. Coffee was poured and re-poured. Conversations happened in low voices, in pairs, in the particular intimate register that people use when they've survived something together and are still learning how to exist on the other side of it. Preacher found Mercer on the porch at midnight. The old biker sat down beside him on the steps. Neither spoke for a long time. The dogs had been let out of their kennel and lay in the yard, massive shapes breathing in the dark. "Harlan," Preacher said finally. "Yeah. I rode with him for 14 years. I knew him. Or I thought I knew him. And now I have to rebuild every memory with this new information, and I don't..." He stopped, rubbed his face. "I don't know how to mourn a man I'm angry at." "You mourn the parts that were real," Mercer said. "The riding, the brotherhood, the man he was before the deal. And then you carry the rest as a reminder of what happens when good men make deals with machines. And the club? The Night Reapers? Everything we built. If it was built on his arrangement with Landry, it wasn't. The arrangement kept us from being targeted. But the club itself, what it means, what it does, who we are when we ride, that was never Landry's creation. That was ours. And what we did tonight was proof that it's still ours." Preacher looked at him. In the dark, the old biker's face was all shadows and angles, carved by moonlight into something ancient and tired and unwilling to quit. "What happens now?" Preacher asked. "We rebuild. The diner, the club, all of it. We take Harlan's files and we return every piece of evidence to the women it belongs to. We find every name in those folders and we give them back what was taken. Not justice, not yet. The courts handle that. But acknowledgement. The simple acknowledgement that someone knows what happened to them and believes them. That's a lot of doors to knock on. We've got a lot of riders." Preacher almost smiled. The ghost of it lived in the darkness of his beard for a moment before settling into something more permanent. Not a smile, but the foundation of one. The place where smiles get built when there's finally enough solid ground to support them. 3 weeks passed. The storm season ended the way storm seasons end in that part of the country. Gradually, reluctantly, the sky clearing in increments, each day a little warmer, a little drier, the air slowly releasing its grip on the moisture it had been carrying for weeks. Black Hollow Diner reopened on a Saturday. The window had been replaced, the tables righted, the jukebox repaired, not by a professional, but by Cortez, who turned out to have an inexplicable talent for mechanical things that played music, perhaps because music was the one thing Leavenworth hadn't been able to take from him. The register worked. The grill was hot. The coffee was fresh. Eden stood behind the counter at 6 a.m. with a splint on her wrist and a face that was healing in the visible public way that faces heal, the bruises fading through their spectrum of purple to green to yellow, a timeline of violence becoming a timeline of recovery, readable by anyone who looked closely enough to see. She didn't hide it, didn't cover it, wore it the way soldiers wear campaign ribbons, not with pride exactly, but with the quiet acknowledgement that something had happened and she'd survived it, and the survival itself was a kind of decoration that didn't require ceremony. The Night Reapers occupied the back booth. They always occupied the back booth. It was understood, but something had changed. The booth itself was the same, cracked vinyl, scarred wood, the same coffee rings and cigarette burns that had been there for decades. The men were the same, Mercer, Decker, Preacher, Cortez, Dutch, Needle. Same leather cuts, same patches, same scars and glass eyes and restless hands and thousand-yard stares. But the quality of their silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of men guarding a perimeter. It was the silence of men occupying a space they'd earned, not through violence, not through intimidation, but through the specific costly act of standing between people and the things that hunted them. Needle's hands were calm. Not still. They'd never be still, and nobody expected them to be. But calm. Moving at a pace that suggested rhythm rather than chaos, a man whose internal weather had shifted from storm to wind. His VA regimen had been adjusted. His attendance was consistent. He still carried the war inside him, but the war had been renegotiated into something closer to a ceasefire than a siege. Dutch spoke. Not often, not at length, but he spoke. Short sentences, delivered in a voice so deep it seemed to originate in the floor beneath him. He'd won his custody hearing, supervised visitation every other weekend. His son was 4. The first time the boy visited, Dutch sat on the floor of his apartment and let the child climb over him like a mountain, and the sound Dutch made, a low, rumbling laugh that shook his entire body, was a sound that none of the Reapers had ever heard him make, and that all of them would remember. Cortez's wrongful conviction was under review. The connection between his imprisonment and Harlan's arrangement with Landry had surfaced during the broader investigation, and a public defender, young, relentless, operating with the particular fury of an attorney who discovered that the system she served had deliberately malfunctioned, had taken his case. And Preacher rode. Every morning, before dawn, alone, on roads that Harlan used to ride. Not in tribute, not in anger, in something more complicated, the ongoing, unfinished process of separating the man he'd loved from the things that man had done, and finding a way to carry both without being destroyed by the contradiction. On a cold morning in early winter, 7 months after the night at the diner, a car pulled into the Black Hollow parking lot. Eden was pouring coffee. Mercer was in the back booth. The jukebox was playing something country and warm, a song about highways and homecoming that nobody was really listening to, but everyone could hear. The diner bell rang. Lena Cross walked in. She looked different. Not dramatically. Not the way movies show transformation, with new hair and new clothes and the visual shorthand of a life rebuilt. She looked different the way actual people look different when the thing that was killing them stops, rested, present, occupying her full height instead of compressing herself into the smallest possible space. Her eyes still moved, still scanned, but the scanning had changed from surveillance to awareness, from threat detection to the simple act of seeing a room and choosing to be in it. Maisie was behind her. The child had grown. 7 now. hair longer, pulled back in a ponytail that bounced when she walked. She wore a backpack, school, evidence of routine, of a life that included homework and lunchboxes and the ordinary infrastructure of childhood that had been denied to her for years. Maisie saw Mercer across the diner. Her face broke into a smile that reorganized every hard surface in the room into something softer, warmer, more inhabitable. She ran. Across the tile floor, past the counter, past the stools, past Eden, who stepped aside with a smile that cost nothing and was worth everything. Maisie ran straight into Mercer Kane's arms with the full-body commitment of a child who has decided that a person is safe and will not be talked out of it by anything as small as logic or caution. Mercer caught her, lifted her, held her against his chest with arms that had been built for damage and refined for protection, and the leather of his cut creaked against the nylon of her backpack, and the smell of coffee and engine oil and old cigarette smoke mixed with the smell of children's shampoo and school supplies. And Mercer Kane closed his eyes. In the back booth, 5 bikers looked away, pretended to study their coffee, pretended the fluorescent light was causing the brightness in their eyes, pretended that the sound Mercer made, a single, quiet exhale that carried the weight of every mile he'd ridden and every ghost he'd carried and every night he'd spent wondering if his own daughter remembered his face, was just breathing, just breathing. Eden poured 2 glasses of orange juice without being asked, set them on a tray with a stack of blueberry pancakes, the diner's best, the county's best, though she might have been biased since she was the only place open past 10. She carried them to the booth where Lena was sitting across from Mercer, Maisie between them, the child already talking about school, and her teacher and a horse she'd seen at a farm near the shelter, and a drawing she'd made that she wanted to show the big sad man who liked the cartoon with the horse. Eden set the food down. Lena looked at her, at the fading marks on Eden's face, at the splint on her wrist, at the diner around them, rebuilt, functional, carrying its scars the way all of them carried theirs, visibly, without apology. "Thank you," Lena said, the same words she'd said in the loading dock 7 months ago, but different now, weighted differently, carrying the accumulated meaning of everything that had happened between then and now. The running, the hiding, the healing, the slow and painful process of rebuilding a life from the wreckage of the one that had been taken from her. Eden nodded. Her throat was tight. It had been tight for 7 months every time she thought about that night, about the child's whisper, about the pancakes, about the moment she'd decided that being decent was worth whatever it cost. "Same pancakes," Eden said. "Recipe hasn't changed." Maisie grabbed one with both hands and bit into it, and syrup ran down her chin, and she laughed, a full, uncomplicated 7-year-old laugh that filled the diner the way sunlight fills a room, reaching every corner, warming every surface, finding the cracks and the scars, and the places where damage had been done, and making them part of the architecture rather than flaws in it. Outside, Harley engines rumbled softly in the parking lot. Chrome caught winter light. Exhaust rose in thin white streams against cold air. Snow was coming, the forecast said by evening, the first real snow of the season, the kind that would cover the county in white and make everything look clean and new, even though nothing underneath had changed, and everything underneath had changed. In the back booth of Black Hollow Diner, a scarred man held a child who wasn't his daughter, but who reminded him why the word daughter still meant something. Around him, 5 broken men in leather cuts drank coffee and said nothing and felt everything. Behind the counter, a waitress with a healing face and a story that had been heard by millions poured refills and wiped tables and existed in the particular, hard-won peace of a woman who'd discovered that the invisible life she'd been living had been preparation for the visible one. And in Ridger County, where the highways crossed and the neon signs flickered and the mountains held their silence against whatever storms came next, a legend took root. Not in violence, not in thunder, not in the roar of engines or the crack of knuckles against bone. It started with pancakes, cold rain, and a few wounded men who still remembered how to protect people when the world failed them.